Hello everyone, today a very interesting video awaits you. I would like to ask you to support this video by liking and subscribing to the channel. Enjoy watching everyone. This story begins with the protagonist's memories of the day when one of the gangs dared to abuse his own sister. Before this terrible situation, he managed to become part of a criminal group. Due to the fact that he was the weakest of them, the guy had to obey against his will in a way that he could not fight back on his own. One day, a rival gang targets his sister. There were many of them. She tried to run away from them, but nothing worked. The young man will never be able to forget when the Tokyo incident happened. The terrible images remained forever in his memory. On that very day, there was a massive brawl between high school bikers and a street gang. It was then that group violence occurred against his own sister, which he was unable to prevent. The girl became pregnant after this and could not survive what happened to her, so she decided to commit suicide. The guy had memories of that terrible day, how the younger one called him for help, but he could not do anything. Several people held the young man tightly and forced him to watch. He asked them to stop, but they did not listen to him. In this way, the gang issued a warning to his group. The young man reproached himself for being too weak and unable to save her or at least try to help her in some way. The guy believed that if he had not been such a weakling, the terrible incident could have been avoided. He would have defended his sister and fought off the attackers. So he decided to work on his fitness and went to a martial arts club. 5 years later, our hero was already a participant in fights in an organization for the development of martial arts. The boy grew up and became one of the best fighters in the history of the club. No one was his equal. The young man used his anger and thirst for revenge as an impetus for his physical improvement. The guy trained hard to completely change his life and forget about his past. It all started in a regular gym, where he worked hard every day, and now he has already become a professional in the ring. The young man had no equal, so at the moment his life has changed radically. But a huge feeling of guilt and memories still did not allow him to exist in peace. The fact that the guy has now become stronger does not allow him to go back to the past and change the course of events. A few days later, Sujaman invited our hero to participate in match fixing. The outcome of which has already been determined. Of course, not for free. The man said that everyone considered the guy invincible because no one had ever managed to take victory away from him. Behind the scenes, huge bets are being placed on him. The young man had to give in once in a fight, and after that, a fight for the champion title would immediately be organized. After hearing such an offer, Gossi apologized and said that he was forced to refuse. Sujaman was dissatisfied and asked whether the young man understood that all the profit of this organization rested on them. But the guy was adamant and replied that if there were no more questions for him, then it was time for him. He didn't become stronger in order to lose. Gossi felt a little stupid, because fighting for the champion title was his dream, but he was not going to embarrass himself in the ring. After the conversation, the young man went straight to collect his things. His friend said he was being reckless. Kenzie Furudashi didn't understand why he was going to leave and whether he really thought it was the right thing to do. But our hero believed that there was no other way out, because he had made an enemy in Sujimona, so he would no longer have peace here. After taking a sip of water, the young man looked at the empty suitcase and heard his friend ask what he was going to do next. Gossi replied that even if he became a champion, the money would not increase, so the young man would return to his hometown and get a job. With his physical form it will be easy. Kenzie remembered his friend's request and said that he had asked his friend, a detective from the investigation bureau, about this issue. After which he handed over information about the Tokyo incident to him and asked why he needed all this. Our hero replied that he just wanted to find out the truth. After all, after the crime he was not informed about the identities of the perpetrators and the punishment they suffered. Furudashi clarified whether the guy was going to take revenge. In this situation, there is no need to do such stupid things. Then he added that the young man is so strong that he can kill with his bare hands, so you need to be careful. Gossi had all the information about the criminals on hand, and now he could easily find them and destroy them. But it was too late, the past cannot be changed. The most important thing is that Chisato herself would not want this. Our hero thanked his friend for the information provided, but he asked again if the guy was going to take revenge. The young man swore no. This is only thanks to the fact that Kenzie stopped him. The invincible fighter's legs suddenly gave way and Furudashi, showing a bottle of water, said that it had finally begun to act. Then he stated that his parents' old house was currently on fire. The guy was surprised by this. Kenzie said that he really thought that after refusing he would be released so easily. The organizer of fixed fights is Kisaragi Toma. Our hero thought to himself that if this is really true, then arson is this man's style. Gossi did not understand why his school friend did this to him and betrayed him, because he had never done anything bad to him. Furudashi replied that the stronger the guy became, the more he hated him. After some time, our hero woke up in a warehouse, tightly tied to a chair. The same Kisaragi stood in front of him and silently smoked a cigarette, watching him. Noticing that Gossi had woken up, the man said hello and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Then he asked if he knew why he was here. Our hero responded with silence. Then Toma said that he would not leave this room alive, so one last time we could talk. Stuffing out his cigarette, he said that on that day, the champion's sister was violated for a reason. The organizer of this was he personally, and the guys were specially selected as a target. The young man was discouraged by what he heard and did not understand why he did it. Our hero began to remember that on that day, his sister was lured into a certain alley by the girl Kisaragi. And he himself ended up there because he was a member of a group headed by Toma, so everything fits together. Gossi said that if everything said is true, then why is he poisoning his life? But he replied that he would not tell him. After which he began to take a pistol out of his pocket and say that this would be his last fun with him. Finally, the guy decided to ask if his sister died only because the head of the gang didn't like him for some reason. The man replied that that was exactly the case. Then he shot our hero in the head. Our hero died that day, but by some miracle, he returned to the times before the Tokyo incident. He was 16 years old again and in juvenile detention. Standing in front of him was his school friend Kenzie Furudashi. The young man addressed him by name. Kenzie got angry and asked if the guy had mixed up something, he should address him as respected. Then she began to kick Gossi, but he successfully blocked them. After several unsuccessful attempts, Furudashi grabbed the young man by the collar and said that he was too insolent. Our hero did not understand why Kenzie did this, because this is the stupidest thing that can happen, and his old friend knows about it. Is he really a boy again and in a colony? A warden appeared at the door, suspected something was wrong and asked what they were doing here. Furudashi immediately replied that it was nothing special. They were just joking with each other. But the policeman, of course, didn't believe him and thought that a little later he would dance with him. Our hero began to remember that it seemed his name was Mr. Yama, but still could not believe that he had returned to the past. It seemed like something out of the realm of fantasy. The guy also could not forget how he ended up in the colony. He was the number 6 in the Kisaragi group. On that very day, a fight broke out. All responsibility was placed on him, so he ended up in a juvenile prison. It was during those times that Toma began to make a name for himself in criminal circles. The man beat everyone who got in his way, so he made many enemies. This was his way of making everyone afraid of him. The colony was a veritable brood of snakes, in which there were a large number of boys from different gangs. And everyone was well aware that our hero was a Kisaragi man. For a weakling like him, it was like being caught in a lion's cage. Various insects were constantly thrown into his food, and this had already become commonplace. While the guards were not looking, the young man was beaten by all and sundry. This was part of the daily routine. Prison can be called one of the worst moments in his life, but the guy will never be able to forget some event that happened there. Kenzie approached him and said that today is April Fool's Day, so everyone will celebrate. Gossi didn't understand why he was invited, but his friend told him not to be afraid, because it would be an ordinary party with friends. As they approached the crowd, Furutoshi turned and added that the Murayama boss had been attracted to his butt for a long time. The leader was a bald young man, Ichiro, 2 meters tall and weighing 130 kilograms. He looked truly intimidating. Our hero felt uneasy, and he hoped that this was just a stupid joke. Kenzie replied that initially they thought so too, because today is the 1st of April, but in fact it turned out that he was quite serious. Murayama ordered his wards to bring the guy to him. Gossi was immediately captured by 2 thugs. They began to tear his clothes and take them off. The young man screamed and tried to escape, for which he was punched in the jaw. They made him kneel naked and added that if he continued to rock the boat, it would only get worse. The boss asked if the young man knew what they wanted to do with him. The young man asked in fear what exactly. The leader replied that the tattoo would be done with very rare ink. In criminal circles, honor matters a lot, and the scars he received that day forever defined him as a small fry. Throwing the memories out of his head, our hero noticed that a notebook was sticking out of his pocket. These turned out to be records that he received before his death, but the guy did not understand how they could end up with him in the past. The notebook that Fuchirachi handed him contained notes regarding the Tokyo incident and all the data of the criminals. Previously, he could not even find out their names, but now, he will not miss the opportunity to take revenge on everyone. After looking through what was written, the young man saw that the main suspect in the Chisato Ijima case was Ichiro Murayama. You couldn't even delve into all the other names as much as they are, in any case, members of his gang. Kenzie entered the room and said that today was April Fool's Day and everyone was going to celebrate. Our hero understood what was about to happen next, but he returned to the past, not the weakling he was. Meanwhile, 2 men approached one of the guys on the street and said that they needed to talk. These were police officers who wanted to know some information. Investigators began to ask about Ichiro Murayama, but the young man shrugged and said that they were ordinary average people and were not particularly aware of his affairs. He only knows that he is a high school student, 2 meters tall and weighing 130 kilograms. Also, at his age, the guy is a real monster. Plus, the young man has been boxing since elementary school. Seeing that the interlocutor decided to take a smoke break, the policeman reprimanded him and said that he was insolent. The boy apologized and hid the cigarette. Then he stuttered and said that the boss was a pretty strong guy. He once heard that because of a fight that ended in serious injuries, the leader was not allowed to take a test for professional suitability. 10 people were beaten to a pulp, and the guy is sure that Ichiro did it all himself. At this time, Gossi, after being invited to April Fool's Day, was thinking about what to do next, because he knows what will happen there. In sports competitions, opponents are divided into weight categories as muscle strength directly depends on weight. This means that the capabilities of him and Murayama are completely different, because he is much larger. He thought that, for example, in judo, if a woman weighing 50 kilograms received a gold medal, she would still not be able to withstand an opponent weighing 100 kilograms. But, on the other hand, the young man is a professional, and not the weakling he was before. If the fight is one-on-one, then even in his current physical form, he has a chance to win. The problem was that besides the boss, there would be many more of his wards who clearly would not miss the opportunity to get involved. My thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Kenzie, who asked why the young man was silent. Our hero replied that everything was fine and there was no need to pay attention. An old friend said that all the same, there is no point in talking here, since his head ordered the boy to be brought to him, which means he will do so. Gossi thought to himself that at the moment beating him is a very simple task. But he smiled and said out loud to give him a little time and wait. So, as the warden gave him a particularly important assignment, which the guy cannot fail to fulfill. A colony employee will come after a while to check how he coped. Fuchirachi asked if he was going to come after lights out. Our hero replied that yes, it was not for nothing that the assignment was special. The interlocutor, without saying another word, began to swing his fist at the young man. The young man noted that his vision remained as sharp and the movement of his fist seemed very slow to him. Gossi allowed Kenzie to hit him so that they would continue to think that he was powerless. After the blow, the young man turned to leave and added that the party was being postponed to the next day. To himself, our hero thought that this guy had really fallen for it, because the overseer shouldn't have come here at all. After some time, the young man was eating in the dining room and the gang leader entered the room, along with his charges. Everyone took their seats, except for the young man who was supposed to bring Gossi yesterday. After the warden left, they began to pull off the young man's pants. Smiling, Ichiro said that everyone should see this, because it's not often that tattoos are burned directly onto the body. Some of those present began to laugh at him, and some did not understand why it was, they were not at the show. Our hero thought to himself that this looked very unpleasant. Then he noticed how the boss pointed his finger at him and said something to his wards. The guys immediately flew up to him, grabbed him by the shirt and said that now the guy was in trouble and should pray that he would not be killed. Taking him outside, the boys ordered him to ask for forgiveness from them. Gossi said, sorry and asked if they really did this to that guy because he didn't bring him yesterday. They grabbed the young man by the shirt again and angrily hissed that he had understood everything correctly. This happened through his fault, and he must answer for it. Our hero bowed his head and shouted that he was very sorry. The guys looked at each other in surprise. After which they turned around and said that this time they forgive him, but next time he won't get off so easily. But unexpectedly, the interlocutor turned around and was about to strike Gossi in the face. The young man felt that this could not end so easily and that simple apologies could not get rid of them. Then I thought that one of them was tattooed yesterday and would not be particularly useful in battle. He might even be able to beat the crap out of the two of them now. After which he told them that this was simple self-defense and there was no need to complain later. Our hero reflected that in order to fight two at the same time, it is necessary to aim for the eyes. Afterwards, there is no need to let them recover and strike one after another in order to discourage them. While one opponent is neutralized and the second is at a loss, you need to have time to deal with him. The young man flew up to him and struck him in the stomach area so that he did not have time to do anything. Only a couple of minutes passed, and the guys were already beaten and defeated. But everything turned out to be not so simple. The first attacker jumped up and rushed to attack. Gossi thought to himself that his muscles were too weak after all. Dodging the blow, he thought that he had to intimidate them well so that they would leave him behind. But amateurs never knew how to give up on time, so the guy decided to come at him from behind. Literally a second later, he delivered a crushing blow to the spine. It was a direct attack on the internal organs, the kidneys, which were barely protected by thin ribs. The young man learned about this technique when he was just starting to practice boxing, and it is prohibited in all types of martial arts. The young man realized that a couple of blows, in particular to the kidneys, could neutralize the amateurs. At this point he is not a pathetic, helpless boy, and I wondered if he would be able to defeat Ichiro. Then Gossi saw the warden, thought that he was his savior and ran quickly towards him. The policeman began to come closer and ask what happened and why the guy was calling him. Noticing the two unconscious, lying on the ground, the observer asked who had treated them like that. The young man said that he overdid it a little. But he fully admits his guilt and is ready to be punished. After which he asked whether he would face punishment for such a thing. Some time later, the injured guys told their boss about what had happened. Murayama replied that they were useless creatures and picked up a can of gas. After which he lit a lighter in his other hand and said that humiliating his charges was tantamount to humiliating him. Then, laughing loudly, he began to set fire to the hands of one of the beaten men, saying that he needs to add another perm to his tattoo so that he becomes the most fashionable among all. The young man was in great pain, and he began to beg for mercy, but all he heard in response was, "Shut your mouth." The leader was not going to stop and punched him in the jaw. So much so that the boy flew to the side. The young man, plus everything else, hit the wall with all his might and fell unconscious. Those present said that this was the first time they had seen someone fly some distance away from a blow. Ichiro then turned to the second participant in the fight and asked what he said about being blinded. The young man began to babble that they had hit him right in the eyes and he didn't even have time to blink. The opponent used dirty techniques, which are prohibited in all types of martial arts. Flexing his fists, the boss said that if that person does whatever he wants, then why can't they do the same? After which he turned to the gang and asked where the guy who dared to insult him was now. He can't get away with a simple beating. Murayama shouted that he would not leave a wet spot for what he had done. The young man is not going to endure such humiliation. One of his charges cautiously reported that it looked like he had been put in solitary confinement for 4 weeks. Meanwhile, Gossi in his cell was thinking that there was nothing to be happy about yet. He has a lot of work ahead of him to improve himself. The locals are not at all different from animals, so you need to show them who you are in the food chain. Without this, they will again try to make him a 6. The guy thought that he couldn't waste another minute and needed to start training. Hearing some strange sounds from the punishment cell, the guard came up to see what the young man was doing there. The policeman saw him trying to do push-ups, but he couldn't do anything and kept falling to his knees. Our hero worked hard and wrote down all the types of exercises he did in a notebook. The young man remembered all the necessary training, starting from squats and ending with types of martial arts. He also tried to eat more in order to gain weight as quickly as possible. In such an intense rhythm, the whole month passed almost unnoticed. He had almost every minute planned out. Despite the fact that he followed the regime, ate right and constantly exercised, his body remained practically unchanged. He remained too thin. The young man seemed to begin to gain muscle mass, but from the moment he started training, at least a couple of months must pass for the effect to become noticeable. But there was still progress, because if physical changes were not noticeable, then the nerves were trained for sure, because they are also important as they transmit commands to the brain. After a while, the guy was sitting on a bench and breathing fresh air, watching others play football. Suddenly, someone put a hand on his shoulder and announced that he had finally been released, otherwise everyone had already waited. On the way, a member of the group said that who would have thought that the life of an outcast was so amazing. Then he began to list that Satsuma had a tattoo on his entire butt, Ikamori almost had all his hair burned, and Miyashita was slammed to the wall with a blow. The culprit of this whole celebration decided to simply sit out in solitary confinement. Does the young man understand what awaits him ahead? Gossi asked what will happen next. The interlocutor replied that first they would give him a tattoo, and then they would aim napalm right in his face. The guys will make him go through all the suffering that their friends had to endure. After which he clapped his hands and said that they would not leave the young man soon and hinted that among them there were those who were interested in boys in terms of love. The guy can cry, scream, nothing will save him. He will become their toy until the end of his sentence and he will have no peace here anywhere. The guys were waiting for them around the corner and his most memorable torture, which they all really wanted, would soon begin. Gossi listened to him calmly, after which he addressed him by name, Furitachi, which infuriated the guy in a way that the word master could not. Our hero repeated all the threats and wishes he had said, after which he clarified whether he had said everything correctly. Then, without wasting any time, he began punching his old school friend in the face. Finally, he performed a control kick to the head, and the opponent was defeated. After Furitachi fell to the ground exhausted, our hero pushed his head with his foot. Then he added that he was happy with everything, because he was not going to forgive anyone anyway. Meanwhile, around the corner, the young man was reasoning out loud that, be that as it may, he still couldn't burn people. This is extremely cruel. Another asked that he doesn't like to mock the weak, because that's why they end up in a group. Then the guys wondered why number 2 had been missing for so long, because his task was only to bring the offender to the right place, but he had disappeared somewhere. Suddenly, Gossi appeared from around the corner, completely alone, and those present began to guess that Furitachi had been beaten by him. One of them said that with the effect of surprise, anyone can become a winner. Then, rubbing his fists, he added that in a fair fight, this weakling would never win. Our hero at this time was thinking that there were 5 of them, that is, numerical superiority and, as a bonus, that they had been fighting for several days. Assessing his capabilities, the young man understands that the best tactic in such a situation is to escape. But if he runs away and chickens out just once, these guys won't leave him alone until his last breath. Therefore, he decided that first he needed to cut off the head of the snake, that is, their leader, who was asking for it. If you manage to defeat him, then everyone else will think 10 times before approaching him. Deciding not to waste time, the guy struck the leader first, kicking him in the knee area. At the same time, he thought that in order to neutralize the enemy, it was first necessary to knock him down. Next, you need to make a blow in a curved arc so as to hit the crystal jaw. You must hit with your whole palm so that the blow is more powerful and the enemy is more likely to pass out. The plan worked perfectly. The arrogant boy was defeated without having time to land a single blow. But then another of them screamed and rushed to attack the young man in order to avenge his friend. Our hero was not at a loss and decided to use a technique from the martial art of judo, a throw over the shoulder. After all, if the head is damaged, it can be considered almost fatal. The remaining guys were shocked by what they saw and reasoned that this guy was so strong and his actions were not at all like sneak attacks. They didn't understand what to do next, but they could try to surround him. Perhaps something can come of this, because there are more of them. The young man thought that in the worst-case scenario for him, the remaining gang members would simply get scared and run to call Murayama for help. Suddenly, the young man turned around and began to quickly run away. The guys did not expect such a turn. They shouted that they needed to catch him, and that was exactly what Gossi needed. The guy thought that these creatures were typical scum who were afraid of the strong. But if you show them even the slightest hint of weakness, they will cling like vultures and will mock you until the end of their days. Therefore, the young man turned sharply towards them in order to strike again. Taking advantage of the effect of surprise, he managed to attack one of them. After that, he again rushed to run somewhere, but the guys did not understand what was happening. As they rushed after him, Gossi thought to himself that his plan was working and the boys were not smart enough. The young man purposefully led them into a dead end in order to realize his plan. The gang members were happy that they had finally managed to catch up with this impudent man who had created so many problems for them. But the guy was not going to give up and stood up. One of them asked how he wanted to defeat him one-on-one. Not paying attention to his questions, our hero flew up to him and struck him in the jaw. The blow was so strong that the young man fell unconscious. Then Gossi approached another boy and said that he was next. Then he added that now they would definitely fight one-on-one, because all his other friends were passed out. But suddenly Murayama appeared, who put his hand on his charge's head. The young man did not expect to see him here now. Ichiro stated that he was the same being that had done so many things. He then threw the guy he was holding aside and he hit the wall with all his might. Our hero did not understand how he could be so strong, like a gorilla. He is only 17 years old, but his muscle mass is enormous. Meanwhile, Ichiro wondered what he should do with this boy. The young man, compared to the boss, looked very small and frail. Therefore, his victory over him seemed almost unreal. When the leader began to move quickly, the young man was thinking about what his next step would be. If we think from the point of view of the fastest blow in the world, then this would be a boxing attack to the body. Thanks to his knowledge, the guy managed to block the blow. Ichiro was surprised and concluded that the guy also practices boxing and is good at it. After which he warned that they were not in the ring, he couldn't just give up and the judge wouldn't save him, so he shouldn't expect any mercy. Then our hero began to strike him with blows and skillfully dodged the retaliatory ones. Murayama was taken aback by the fact that he could not even follow his fist, let alone deflect or block the blow. Gossi understood their difference in weight and his blows were not at all noticeable to his opponent. But if Ichiro hits it, then you can immediately say goodbye to your life. Its power was simply incredible. Since he is a heavyweight and a monster in physical strength, there are practically no equals in the ring. Suddenly, the leader was a centimeter away from our hero, and he noted that Murayama was also fast. This time, it was impossible to avoid a direct punch to the face. But the young man knew that if he moved his body along the trajectory of the blow, the damage caused would be less. Without wasting any time, our hero was about to strike back, and the boss noted that it seemed his target would be the eyes. But the guy grabbed Ichiro by the head and sharply slammed his face against his knee. It was one of the boxing techniques inspired by a certain breed of dog. It is quite dangerous, but if the enemy is several times larger, then the desired effect will not occur. And so it happened, the leader quickly came to his senses and said that it was weak. After which he grabbed Gossi by the collar and said that since the young man had moved on to dangerous techniques, he would also show him a couple. The thug began to lift him into the air. The guy thought to himself that he couldn't get confused, he needed to find support for the blow. Ichiro's favorite habit is to beat his opponent to a pulp, thereby demonstrating a huge difference in strength. Therefore there was no time to waste. Our hero grabbed him by the fingers and pulled him sharply in different directions. Murayama screamed in pain, holding his hand, on which 2 fingers were broken. The guy noted that whether it is self-defense or boxing, when an opponent grabs the collar, he must be prepared for the fact that his fingers may be broken. Watching the leader go berserk, the young man reflected that he had an abnormal amount of muscle, gigantic height and an obsession with fighting. His brain is more like an animal's than a human's, as fights are like a drug for him, and he cannot exist calmly without them. After this attack, our hero felt pain. The leader, it seems, managed to break his finger. The young man then began trying to grab the thug and throw him to the ground. He succeeded, and the guy immediately twisted his arm using a painful hold. But Murayama easily began to lift him with one hand, as if not feeling any pain and as if the young man was some kind of fluff. And he threw Gossi at the wall, saying that he was not the first who started boxing and decided to challenge him. While Ichiro was showing off, the young man rushed to attack him and abruptly knocked him down. After which he stated that he did not want to brag, but few people managed to defeat him. Then he repeated Murayama's words that they were not in the ring, he couldn't just give up and the judge wouldn't help him. The young man began to strike his face one after another, with no intention of stopping. Suddenly, he heard Ichiro's weak voice, who said that he would forgive him everything, so let him stop. After all, there are a huge number of people behind him, and if he doesn't finish now, it will only get worse. Let him think about what awaits him ahead. The young man replied that perhaps it would be more difficult, and perhaps not, but this does not change the fact that the leader clearly does not care now. Realizing that threats were not working, Murayama began to beg for mercy and admit that he was wrong. He also asked for forgiveness for the fact that they attacked him in a crowd. Our hero replied that he could not understand his muttering. After which he continued to strike him in the face, and Ichiro shouted that that was enough and asked him to stop. His charges watched in horror and said that he was already passed out and might not come to his senses so soon. Meanwhile, Gossi stopped and thought that this was still not enough. They must clearly understand who they should be afraid of. When training gopniks, this is the most important rule. After which he looked at the guys who were chasing him and asked who wanted to be next. They shook their heads negatively, demonstrating that they did not want to mess with him. Then the young man did not touch them himself, calmly got up and went on about his business. Some time later, Gossi sat thinking that he was already ready to be sent to the punishment cell again, but no one came for him. Has the group really decided to keep a low profile once again? The Murayama gang abused his sister, and all this happened on the orders of Kisaragi. Opening the notebook, the young man continued to think that if they even laid a finger on his sister, he would destroy them. Gossi returned to the past not as that frail little boy who was not capable of anything. But, suddenly, everything written about the investigation began to disappear before his eyes. The guy was very surprised and wondered if this situation really shouldn't happen now, and he managed to change the future. Then I noticed that new text began to appear in the diary. The suspect was now Kagurazaki, with whom he attended Teiran High School. Our hero could not believe that the future could not be completely changed and the suspects in his sister's case simply changed. But still, the name Murayama disappeared from the list, which means it is possible to influence the chain of events. Therefore, our hero will continue to change situations until there is no trace left of that terrible day. Some time later, the young man was finally released. He looked at his watch and realized that his mother was delayed and did not have time to meet him on time. And the guy practically hasn't spoken to his father since high school. Then he saw a girl quickly approaching him and he was shocked at who it was. It was his sister. The young man shouted in surprise what she was doing here. The girl straightened her hair and said that she had not seen her brother for a long time. Next, she apologized in advance for the next question, which might scare him, and asked if he had heard anything about reincarnation or time jumps. Meanwhile, in one of the schools, a student was kneeling near the board with darts stuck into his body. A group of 4 guys had fun and passed the time in such a cruel way. They threw sharp needles at him, which dug into his body, and the young man screamed in pain. One of them noted that he earned only 0 points and hit the wrong target. After which, lighting a cigarette, Kagurazaki said that his screams were not funny at all. Has the guy forgotten that he has to entertain them all? He also advised me to practice my reaction. The young man replied indignantly that he was not some kind of actor. The young man responded to this by saying that his main task is to entertain. The guy is a comic actor or simply a clown. After which, he began throwing darts at him again. The tormentor became bored and wished that at least something interesting would happen. Having put out the cigarette and going to the window, he remembered that earlier there was a boy at this school, Gossi, and he really liked to mock him. One of the wards replied that the boss Kisaragi seemed to notice him and took him under his wing to join his group. If they start mocking him again, won't they turn the head against themselves? It's better not to touch his people again and not create unnecessary trouble for yourself. The young man silently took out an awl and pierced the nasal septum through the man who voiced this. Watching the guy writhe in pain, the high school student said that Kisaragi dropped out of this school, which means he is now the boss here and will do as he sees fit. Then he added that he was aware that he was looking after Gossi and for some reason was painfully obsessed with him. It was not clear what connected them so much. But he is not afraid of Kisaragi, and mocking that boy is very fun and interesting. This was always his favorite pastime. Meanwhile, in the colony, Ichiro and Kenzie talked about how the gossy boss behaved like a lone wolf until the last day of his imprisonment. Murayama said that he did not want to have anything to do with them. Then why did the young man become so attached to him? He replied that he was used to bending under the strong, but that was not the point. The young man had an incomprehensible feeling that he was destined to follow this man. Murayama laughed loudly at what he heard and said that he sounded like a girl who had fallen head over heels in love. Furutoshi replied that the guy should stop mocking him, because for him it sounds strange, but he feels that it is right. As if it was destined to happen. But nevertheless, when he tried to establish a relationship with him, Gossy rejected him more than once and the young man did not understand why. Then he added that, by the way, their boss is very strong. Ichiro couldn't argue, because he defeated him. Then Kenzie asked if he was the strongest high school student of all. Murayama asked if he had ever heard who is the strongest. The young man replied that this was Iki Yatsuki. The former boss replied that he was just an amateur and didn't know much about martial arts. Little could he have imagined that Gossy would be able to take him down with almost one blow. At this time, the sister asked if the young man knew anything about reincarnation or time jumps. The guy asked confusedly what she was talking about. Chisato laughed and concluded that he didn't understand anything about this, so it was useless to ask. Then she added that it was her friend who put her up to this. The brother asked what other friend. She replied that her friend's boyfriend had become interested in the occult and wondered why he was so interested. The young man remembered that, judging by the notes in the notebook, his sister was lured into that very alley by the girl Kisaragi. The young man got very angry and shouted who exactly her friend's boyfriend was. The unsuspecting girl smiled and replied that this was his old friend, Kisaragi. Already in his home, the young man wished his family a bon appetit before starting to eat. After tasting the food, the guy noted that it had been a long time since he had eaten carriage cooked by his mother, in a special homemade sweet and sour sauce. It was very tasty, because in his previous life, he returned home only on holidays. Now it's time to move on to the main dish. You might think it's a steak with a large portion of garlic, but only an amateur who doesn't know his mother would think so. The pinnacle of her culinary art has always been omurice, fried rice wrapped in an omelette and topped with ketchup. For the young man it was divinely delicious, and he could not stop eating it. After finishing dinner, Gossy said that there was nothing better than his mother's food and he realized that previously he had hardly shown them the respect they deserved. The family looked at him with their mouths open in surprise. Then he turned to his mother, and she, in turn, stammered, asked what he wanted. The young man asked for more and handed the plate into her hands, after which he said, "Thank you." His relatives began to look at him with even greater surprise, and his mother asked him what he had just said. The young man replied that he thanked her and, looking at their faces, asked what was happening to them. The mother replied that he had changed a lot since the juvenile colony. It dawned on our hero that at this age he had a severe rebellious period and did not behave in the best way. His family was a little afraid of him. Mom asked if he changed so dramatically because he met a good mentor. The young man replied that Warden Yama was very persuasive. After which he laughed and thought to himself that it would be easier for them to believe this version, but the policeman was really a good man. A little later, sitting in his room, the guy was thinking about why Kisaragi started talking about reincarnation and time travel. Immediately after talking with Chisato, his girlfriend called her and said that he had disappeared somewhere and was not picking up the phone. For about a week no one knew where he was. While our hero was serving time for him, the former boss moved from place to place. He had a lot of enemies, so he always had bodyguards around him and for this he founded Mabudachi. This squad, with a terrible name, accepted only martial artists or those who became famous in street fighting. It was so easy to get into it. A person must have achievements. There is a high chance that the young man will have to fight Kisaragi and his thugs. But while there is time, you need to take care of your physical fitness and develop your body. Walking down the street, Gossi noted that he doesn't have money for gym classes yet, so dumbbells and a horizontal bar will do for the first time. Dumbbells can be used as additional weight during squats and also during pull-ups if you put them in a backpack and hang it on your back. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a male voice that greeted him. He was an assistant juvenile inspector at the Hakeo District Police Station, and his name was Saito. Our hero replied that nothing has changed and he still can't believe that the man is now not a bad guy, but a law enforcement officer. Saito replied that this is not surprising, because he used to lead a gang and in their department, former Yakuza is common. Gossi began to remember that by this time he had already been expelled from the gang, suspecting that he was stealing money from the common fund. And after a couple of years, he will be fired from the police for distributing official information for money. The man put his hand on our hero's shoulder and said that he urgently had to go to the police station with him. The young man asked why. The policeman replied that the guy had just recently left a juvenile detention center and he wanted to teach him a couple of judo tricks so that he wouldn't relax. The young man thought to himself that by tricks he meant beating the fool for fun. He always did this before when he was in a bad mood and his hands itched. The young man calmly asked what would happen if he said he didn't want to. Saito immediately squatted down, covered his head with his hands and began shouting that it hurt him. There was no need to hit him and just don't do it with his feet. After which he calmly stood up and said that the guy was now arrested for assaulting a police officer and resisting arrest. Gossi was extremely outraged by this. The man added that no one will figure out who is right and who is wrong. Moreover, few people will believe that the policeman fell to the ground and began to imitate his own beating. Looking at the confused guy, Saito told him to better agree as long as he is kind and does not use physical force. At the judo club, the policeman began to remember that he really liked doing it as a child and even earned third dan. Newbies will never be able to stand up against him, so he will beat Gossi until he loses consciousness. Saito began to attack him, but the young man blocked the attack without much effort. And he noted that he was so serious about it, but it looked like he hadn't maintained his shape at all and was just rusty from all the time. With such abilities, he is not a rival to our hero at all. Therefore, the young man suddenly grabbed the policeman. And then he threw it over his hip onto the floor. Saito did not expect such a turn of events and looked at the guy in confusion. The fighters watching this were surprised that this gentleman was quickly knocked down by some newcomer, but then they thought that he was unlikely to be new. Kodai headed towards them, and the second interlocutor asked where he was going. The man replied that he was a judo teacher at the police station, so why not give the guy some advice? He was a sergeant and belonged to the police training department in the Hakko region. Former Olympic champion. Saito stated that the boy only managed to knock him down because he was not alert. But against the guy coming at them, Gossi doesn't stand a chance like he is a former champion. Kodai laughed and said that it seemed like the gentleman missed training too often. Then he turned to our hero and said that there was some truth in losing vigilance, but throwing himself over himself was not easy. It looked like the young man had a lot of experience, even though he was wearing a white belt. It won't work to pretend to be a beginner in front of him, and Saito himself is to blame for being so easily fooled. Examining his new opponent, the guy noted that he had a good physique and in this form he could still set the heat. The young man realized that this was an ideal option for an ongoing assessment of his abilities, because he did not yet really understand the state of his body in martial arts skills. If he had been injured or dressed inappropriately, he would have lost to such a pro anyway, but now he is full of strength and in a sports uniform. While bowing before the start of the fight, the police station trainer was wondering what this kid would do next. The young man, without wasting any time, immediately rushed to the attack. Kodai guessed what he wanted to do, which was a double leg takedown. This is a judo technique that allows you to instantly destroy your opponent. Meanwhile, Gossi raised him above himself. After which he threw him to the ground, then he could be turned over into a comfortable position for a choke hold. But at the moment he won't do this yet, and he won't be able to, as his muscle mass leaves much to be desired. The coach was taken aback and asked what it was just now, a wrestling technique or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The young man thought to himself that it was not surprising that such a professional had almost guessed right. Kodai asked what school he was from. The young man replied that he was from Tehran High School. The man noted that this is a real paradise for criminals and this place is very bad to joke about. Then he added that Gossi clearly has talent and would he like to try himself in judo, because he can clearly reach Olympic heights. The guy thought that he should now be in his second year of high school. His body will grow and develop, but his technique will remain the same. He can hone his skills to excellence. It will not be an easy path, but he will definitely succeed. Unfortunately, he was forced to refuse as he had long known in which ring he should perform. Kodai was disappointed, but asked if he would attend one more of his classes. The young man replied that he would have to give up this too. The coach asked why. Gossi replied that he does not like to take part in fights in which the outcome is already clear, because in judo he cannot defeat a policeman. Kodai asked if he was implying that without judo, the man was no match for him. The guy did not answer this question and waved his hand and said that he had to get up early for school tomorrow. I thought to myself that it was time to destroy this hornet's nest. The next day, at school, the tormentors chose a new victim as a dart target. The leader was bored again. It started to amuse him, but very quickly it became uninteresting, so he said that the guy was free for today. Plus, today, straight from the juvenile detention center, his old, favorite toy returned. This young man is a student at Tehran High School. He believes that if there were a bottom in the world, this school would definitely break through it. The average score among all students is 34 points out of 100, and this is considered success. It's absolutely not difficult to enroll here, you just need to know how to spell your name, and if you also know your last name, then you can consider yourself an excellent student. He had to enroll in this place because he was too much trouble in his last high school. At the moment, he was most shocked by the English lessons, in which they were just starting to learn the alphabet. All this reminded him of some crazy world of manga. This educational institution is a real magnet for troubled teenagers and, of course, scumbags of all stripes. This place was also a paradise for gopniks. They came up and said that they had lost money, but they really wanted to eat. The young man handed over money without any problems and helped from the bottom of his heart. But his impudent classmates took all his money. Therefore, this place can also be called a hell for the weak. Meanwhile, Gossi was already sitting in class, and all the students were discussing what an amazing school they have, because in any other school they would have expelled someone who had served time, but here most of them are like that, so if all of them are expelled, then there will be no one left. Our hero sat thinking that according to the new story, his sister should be abused by the new head of the school, Kagurazaki. He took the place of Kisaragi, who disappeared from the school and now holds power with a tight grip. His character is clearly mentally ill. Throwing sharp darts at a person is the least his inflamed brain can do. Even members of his group cannot always avoid bullying. Before our hero's rebirth, on the very day he returned from the colony, Kagurazaki poured boiling water over his naked body. The young man screamed and writhed in pain, but the boss was amused. He stood, looked at it and laughed, getting great pleasure. Sentencing that he really responds perfectly to all his torture. The young man begged to let him go, but the sadist did not want to stop such fun. But then he asked if the guy wanted them to stop pouring boiling water on him. Gossi replied that, of course. After that, the mocker held out his shoe to him, told him to lick it and then he would be free. The young man hesitated and did not want to do this, but the boss said that otherwise they would return to boiling water. Just in case, the young man clarified whether they would definitely let him go after that. Kagurazaki replied that he was keeping his words. The guy had no choice but to do what he was told. The sadist, meanwhile, ordered that when he finished he said, "Excellent," and did not forget that he was their personal clown. After Gossi finished and said this word, the boss laughed loudly, taking satisfaction from such humiliation. Then our hero said that he would go then, but Kagurazaki asked where he was going. Taking out an awl, the guy said that, as promised, the torture with boiling water was over, but now it was time to give him a piercing. Our hero didn't really want to remember those times, but perhaps he will be able to change the situation as it was with Murayama. If he manages to convey to him that other people's families cannot be touched, then Chisato will be saved. Suddenly, some liquid poured onto the young man's head and everyone around him laughed. It was a schoolboy who sarcastically asked for forgiveness and said that his hands simply trembled. Gossi thought to himself that since Kisaragi dropped out of school, he no longer had a shield, and apparently Kagurazaki was not the only one who decided to start bullying him again. The impudent man asked what happened to the young man, did he really like oolong tea that much, but our hero replied that he preferred green tea. The offender laughed and turned to those around him and said that this guy was a real comedian. They doused him with oolong, and the young man suddenly started talking about green tea. After which he exclaimed that he had real talent and everyone laughed together. Gossi didn't understand what was funny about it, but it looks like he was lucky this time. At this time he was not friends with anyone from the class. If it came to a fight, they would attack him in a crowd, and there were about 40 of them. The victory of the opponents would be obvious, because he is all alone. At this point, the smartest option is to just go with the flow. The young man carefully asked what they wanted from him. The guy replied that he answered so funny that he completely forgot about the purpose of coming. Then he added that after school he should go to the cafeteria and buy him a sandwich, at his own expense, of course. Gossi replied that he would if he said he didn't want to. The impudent man replied that Kisaragi dropped out of school, so there was no one else to protect him. Even if he hangs out with the boss and for some reason is his favorite, he is still a small fry. It was only because of a happy accident that a weakling like him ended up in his gang. Each of those present is itching to beat him up. Does he really think that such a pathetic slave has the right to choose? Recess began and the guy shouted to our hero that if he didn't start moving now, he wouldn't have time to buy him what he wanted and they would kill him for it. On the way, the young man thought that Kagurazaki was the main suspect in his sister's case and, at the same time, one of the most influential people in this school. Plus, he will soon become her king. In the world of Gopniks, there are only 3 options: fight, grovel or talk. To begin with, our hero needs to earn a name in the class, and for this it is necessary to change the hierarchy. Going alone against 40 people is simply stupid, but you don't have to make friends with them either. There are currently 2 leaders in his class, Samedzama and Takebayashi. If the young man manages to deal with them, then everyone else will not rock the boat in his direction. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, one of the students was arguing with the saleswoman in the cafeteria and persistently demanded something from her. He was screaming that he needed a protein bar and why they didn't sell them anymore because they used to. The woman replied that he himself asked to buy it for sale, but they cost 500 yen a piece and no one else buys them except him. The young man insisted that she did not understand him, because he was a real fan of these bars. Then he began to load the saleswoman with the fact that they were even included in the food list for astronauts and not only. Even in the training camps of Olympic champions there are a lot of them, the composition is simply perfect. Gossi was surprised that there were still people in this place who understood sports nutrition. Our hero didn't know who he was, but noting his good physical shape, he realized that the stranger was going to the gym. Meanwhile, the woman replied that there were none and there was no need to hold up the line. The guy, upset, went to sit at the table alone. The young man approached him and, holding that same candy bar in his hands, said that if he needed it so much, he could take it. Kachek was surprised where he got it from. Gossi replied that he also trains and there is nothing better than this. Shaking hands, the stranger said that in a healthy body there is a healthy mind, and it's not for nothing that old people advise everyone to go in for sports. Then he added that the only one who does not need to train is Iki Yatsuki, who is the strongest among all living things. Then he asked what our hero's name was. The young man introduced himself to him, and the jock said that his name was Sarasina Miharu. He was in his 3rd year of high school. After this, Sarasina apologized and said that he had to go, and anyway, the large curry cutlets were already sold out. For Gossi, his name seemed very familiar, but he could not remember where he had heard it. When our hero brought the order, the young man exclaimed that he asked for bread with a cutlet, not a sandwich. After which, he threw it at the young man's head, who asked if it wasn't exactly what he asked for. A classmate shouted that he didn't say that and it was better not to piss him off. The guy noted that all 6 samedzama were currently in the dining room and he was absolutely alone. Then, the young man grabbed him by the collar and said that now they would go to the roof, where he would teach him wisdom. While walking up the stairs, a classmate asked if it was a sandwich that he had specifically asked for. Our hero replied that that was exactly what happened. After which he clenched his fist and thought that it didn't matter anyway, because it was clear what would happen next. Already on the roof, Samedzama asked if Gossi had really stopped thinking. What and when he asked does not bother him at all, and this is of no interest to anyone. The main task of a young man is not to remember correctly what needs to be done, and not to piss him off. It seems that the young man does not understand his place in the class, so he must remember his words, for which he will be grateful in the future. Then he added that he would have to physically pay for the precious moral teachings. Then, he kicked the young man with all his might and he did not have time to dodge or block the blow. The guy sat down because it hurt like hell, but it wasn't the strongest blow yet. After lighting a cigarette, one of the class heads said that teaching lessons was very boring. It's easier to just make a punching bag out of a young man. You can also get a couple of cigarette tattoos, because cool guys have them. Maybe after this Gossi will stop being bullied. Our hero, silently, stood up and headed towards the door. The sadist began to be indignant that he decided to run away like a girl. But the guy replied that he had no such thought. Then he closed the door lock so that no one would disturb them. Then he said that there were only the 2 of them on this roof, so no one would be able to come running to help or hear his screams. Hearing this, Samedzama laughed loudly and asked what nonsense he was talking about. But he didn't laugh for long before he was suddenly punched in the nose and began to fall to the ground. Gossi repeated his words that no one would be able to come to his aid and continued to hit him in the face. Having finished dealing with him, the young man thought that Samedzama and Takebayashi were the leaders of the class. It remains to resolve the issue with the second one, and he will become an authority among the 2nd years, and from there it's not far from Kagurazaki. Hearing noise on the street, the guy walked to the edge to see what was happening there and saw Takebayashi surrounded by a large number of people. Opposite him stood Kagurazaki with an awl in his hand. Our hero remembered this moment perfectly. In the 3rd year, the boss began to gain authority among the 2nd years, except for force and intimidation, he did not use anything else. Takebayashi, their unspoken leader, therefore became a victim of this mentally ill guy. He was brought to the stadium and publicly fined. Under this word, terrible things were hidden. The leader of the 2nd years had his hand pierced through. From the painful shock, he immediately lost consciousness. It was from that moment that, gradually, all the 2nd-year students bowed to the power of Kagurazaki and became his sixes. 100 people were kept in fear. Even if rebels appeared, they were very quickly suppressed and put in place. The boss did not plan to intimidate everyone with fines. One day, he did it by accident and he liked it so much that it became his kind of thing. Turning to Samedzima, the young man asked what date it was today. He replied that it was the 12th of September. The guy noted that the story has changed, because he remembers exactly that this was supposed to happen on the 10th of October, Chisato's birthday. Meanwhile, the sadist asked Takebayashi if he could make him laugh harder than Gasi. In response, the young man began to ask him to stop and say that he was really going to hit him with this sharp object. Our hero urgently needed to do something, because if everything continued in the same spirit, then Kagurazaki would no longer be defeated, along with his army of 100 people. At this time, the unspoken leader told the boss to quit and stop going to spread rot on him. Smiling, the leader replied that there is nothing more beautiful than mocking weak people. Suddenly, they heard loud footsteps. Someone was rapidly approaching them. It was the muscle man Saracena Miharu, whom Gasi met in the cafeteria. Taking off his glasses, the guy said that he heard him say that he likes to mock weaklings, but personally he cannot stand this. After which, he offered a fair fight one-on-one and only with fists, without the use of weapons, because he hates it when the weak use them. Taking off his shirt and showing his muscles, Miharu introduced himself and added that he had been a strong guy since childhood, and now he was also involved in bodybuilding. Our hero recognized this young man, with a terrible hairstyle, from the canteen and began to try to remember where he had heard his name before. It dawned on him that this was the third vice-captain of the Mad Bulls biker gang. In this school, no one was equal to him in strength, except perhaps Kisaragi. When Murayama left the juvenile detention center, he and Saracena had a fight. Therefore, at the time of the Tokyo incident, the jock was in the hospital with a bunch of injuries and fractures. Since our hero managed to put Ichiro in his place, the story changed. Miharu and Kagurazaki are roughly equal in strength and it is still possible to avoid the worst. Meanwhile, the jock said that he was not going to stand by and calmly watch as the sadist was going to turn the school upside down. The boss chuckled and asked if he really decided to pose as the People's Avenger after Kisaragi left school. And in general, he was tired of him, because he showed up and mumbled something incomprehensible. Saracena instructed him to ask for his weapon and fight like a man. Kagurazaki jerked sharply towards him with an awl and pretended to attack. After which he said that humanity invented weapons not for beauty, but in order to use them. Not a single soldier on the battlefield will trample on the enemy with his bare hands. This is just stupid. Then, he spat right in the face of the vice-captain of the Crazy Bulls biker gang. And he added that only such a thick-headed mountain of muscles could come up with such nonsense. Wiping his face with a handkerchief, Miharu said that when an animal takes up a weapon, it becomes a person. But does he know what the main difference between an animal and a person is? The correct answer is, image. Kagurazaki asked that don't they all live as the scum of society? Miharu replied that his main rules in life are, do not mock the weak, do not use weapons in fights and do not fight in a crowd against one. That is, to live with your head held high and a fighting spirit in your chest. He can safely say that his parents will never be ashamed of his actions, even if the young man is caught by the police. After listening to him, the sadist replied that now he understood everything. He's just a young man with old ideas. And it's clear why Saracena gave himself such a terrible, out-of-fashion hairstyle that makes everyone laugh. Kagurazaki was going to teach him a lesson anyway, and with such a crowd gathered around, it would be a shame not to take advantage of the moment. Miharu asked that he was really going to fight with him with one awl, did he at least understand what a difference they had in strength? The boss replied that a person can be killed even with an icebreaker. A guy without a weapon wouldn't be able to pierce an apple, but he can do it. An honest guy won't be able to pierce an enemy so that his organs fall out, but he can do it. Therefore he cannot lose. Kachek replied that let it be as he wants. Kaguradzaki stated that he was asking for death. But then Gasi, whom he always loved to mock, caught his eye. Our hero said that it seemed like they were planning something interesting and why not join them. The sadist replied that there was no need to try to make him laugh by saying that he wanted to fight with them. After which he added that he was not having fun at all and Gasi needed to break his face for such disrespect. But Saracena hastened to remind him who his main rival is at the moment. Kaguradzaki thought that beating up a second year would not be a problem, but this guy would be in the way. As soon as they stood up, the sadist's phone started playing and the jock told him to answer. The young man called him stupid and reminded him that their fight was in full swing. Miharu replied that he would not like to croak, but this could be an important phone call, you never know, something bad happened to his relatives. Looking at the phone, the guy said that this time he was lucky, so let him get lost. Saracena began to be indignant that they were fighting here at all, they had gathered and he would not go anywhere. Calling him stupid, Kaguradzaki said to turn around and see who is approaching them. Seeing the teacher, Miharu said that it means his opponent is not completely crazy if he doesn't allow a fight in front of the teacher. In response, I heard that you have to be a complete idiot to get caught by a teacher or the police. Even in battles, you always need to think with your head. After which he began to leave, saying that they would finish what they started later, and now was not the most opportune moment. Some time later, in his house, Kaguradzaki extorted money from someone that was owed to him for that month. Therefore, the person had to drop all his affairs and bring them to his room. After which I wondered what was wrong with Miharu, because he is quite a dangerous opponent. At school he acts like a loner, so no one bothers him. But outside of it, he is the vice captain of the Raging Bulls biker gang. The sadist simply had to bide his time until the teacher arrived, otherwise his reputation would have come to an end. All thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a knock. The boss had already forgotten that they were supposed to come to him. Opening the door, he saw a man kneeling and holding out an envelope with money, which he withdrew to the last penny. This was his own father. While Kaguradzaki was counting the money, Dad asked if he could have his share. Having counted out a certain amount, the young man handed it to his father and said that it was for pocket money. Dad said there are 20,000 more here than usual. The guy replied that he should consider it a bonus. After which he slammed the door, and the parent continued to bow and say thank you. Usually, in such situations, they turn to the police, because he practically kicked his relatives out of the house. But, if you use your head correctly, then everything can be turned in your favor. Humans are creatures who have learned to use weapons. In order to defeat an opponent, they are ready to unite in packs. But also, they are the only creatures who are willing to do anything for money. Kaguradzaki called someone on the phone and said that he wanted him to kill one person. The reward will be 1 million. His target is the vice captain of the Crazy Bulls biker gang. It will take about 50 people to commit a crime. Meanwhile, leaving the cafe, Saracena said that although Gasi looks very frail, he has an excellent appetite. Our hero asked him to shut up, calling him an old man, because his body was still developing. Miharu replied that he admits that they are both sports fans, but stop calling him an old man. Then he added that he didn't know about such an eatery, where you can pay as much as you want by paying 700 yen. The young man replied that this place has remained virtually unchanged for the past 10 years. When he had no money, this establishment became his salvation. Kachek picked up that in addition they have a salad that contains chicken fillet, and this is a precious protein for every athlete. Turning their heads, the guys saw some guys, they had clubs in their hands, and they were clearly going to attack the guys, but for what reason was not clear. Miharu told our hero to step aside, because a bean like him couldn't do anything. Watching one of them rush towards him, the jock added that these were Kaguradzaki's friends, and therefore his prey. But, suddenly, Gossi knocked the pipe out of his hands and fired it into the jaw with all his might. Next, the second young man tried to attack, but the young man instantly blocked the attack. After which, he used a judo technique and threw him over his shoulder. Then, the guy turned to Miharu and said that he asked not to call him a bean. Saracena was taken aback by what he saw and said that it is now clear what type of martial art he practices. The young man could have said earlier that he knew judo techniques, and not have hidden it for so long. Having walked a little further, the guys encountered a large group. Some were on motorcycles, some were holding bats in their hands. Gossi didn't understand how Kagurazaki was able to get so many people, but as usual he approached everything with scale. While they were running, the young man noted that Saracena, with his physique, had an excellent dash. In American football, there was one giant who used to practice martial arts. He weighed 150 kilograms and accomplished the impossible, namely, running 100 meters in 11 seconds. But, dashes are only useful over short distances. The greater the mass, the more difficult it is to move. The young man began to think what to do next, because he could not leave this old man alone. At the exit from the alley, the same group was already waiting for them. Our hero noted that they were well prepared. Miharu began to apologize for the fact that because of him, Gossi got into big trouble. The guy replied that he himself had gotten into a fight in front of Kagurazaki, so it was absolutely not his fault. To himself, our hero thought that things were so bad, since Saracena was already exhausted, and there were at least 50 armed people against them and they would not run much against motorcycles. The young man began to think about what to do next and then, looking up, he saw a bridge across the road and he had an idea. He immediately called out to Miharu and told him to follow him as soon as possible. While Gossi was dragging him by the hand onto the bridge, the muscleman did not understand what was happening and where he was going. Looking around, the guy said that this was a great place because the gang couldn't surround them here, but only approach from both sides and the motorcycles wouldn't get in here. But our hero replied that the jock had misunderstood him. He decided to jump off the bridge, after which he rushed down. The young man ran into a passing truck and shouted at Miharu to hurry up and do the same. Once on the roof, Saracena said that he had said that he was not an old man. Laughing loudly, they drove on, and the gang, in bewilderment, looked after them. After some time, in the muscleman's room, Gossi asked if this was really his house. Miharu replied that he might not believe it, of course, but he had been addressed as young master since childhood. After which, he offered our hero protein tea with protein cookies. When the young man took a bite, Saracena added that he personally prepared them, according to his own recipe. After these words, Gossi felt awkward for some reason, and although they were very tasty, not a single crumb would fit into his mouth. Then, the young man turned to the muscleman and said that he wanted to ask him for a favor. Miharu replied that he would do his best. Just let him stop calling him an old man. Already leaving his house, our hero thought that his room was an ideal place for training, because there was everything he needed there and now he could train there. The old man is actually a very good man. Then he realized that now he couldn't call him that. Suddenly, in an alley, the young man encountered Iki Yatsuki, who was even given a nickname, the strongest in the world. This was according to all the high school students. Our hero thought that his main problem at the moment is poor physical fitness. Compared to his body at the peak of his career, now he is just a frail weakling who is not particularly capable of anything. The reason for this problem is quite simple, he simply does not have enough muscle mass. Suddenly, he and Iki turned to each other and got into a fighting stance. The young man wanted to kick him in the head with all his might. Yatsuki managed to block the blow with just one hand and grabbed his ankle tightly. After which, he simply tossed Gossi aside like a rag doll. The young man did not understand where there was so much strength in such a small body. This is not a person, but some kind of monster. When Ikki attacked again, the guy noted that he definitely didn't practice martial arts like that, he didn't have any practice techniques. But he had amazing speed and it seemed like you were fighting not a man, but a wild tiger. Looking at our hero, Yatsuki said that he is quite a strong opponent. After which, he again tried to hit the young man, but he managed to grab him tightly by the arm. Gossi then used his knowledge of techniques to throw the strongest guy to the ground. Shaking his hand, Ikki stated that it hurt, he couldn't even believe how strong he was. Then he asked who our hero was. The young man replied that he wanted to ask such a question, but suddenly they heard the sound of a motorcycle. It was a policeman who was passing by. The guys quickly disappeared from sight, and the man was at a loss, because he saw shadows there and it seemed to him that a fight was about to break out. The next day, Yatsuki was quietly having lunch and some guys approached him and asked how he was doing. He replied that everything was fine. Yesterday he felt that his temperature had dropped to 39, so he decided to take a walk around the city at night. One of them laughed and said that this did not look like recovery at all. Ikki asked him not to interrupt and added that during his walk he encountered an amazing person. Another young man said that his facial expression was like that of a girl in love. Did he really meet some beauty yesterday? Yatsuki responded that their first meeting didn't exactly go smoothly for both parties. But he definitely fell in love and now wants to meet again in order to demonstrate his strength to the fullest. Meanwhile, Gossi was talking on the phone with Miharu, who was indignant at why the young man was addressing him without respect. Our hero replied that he had already stopped calling him an old man. It's enough. Then he thought that, after all, he had returned to the past, which means he was definitely older than him. He said out loud that he wouldn't go to school for the next couple of days, because he, too, had already been dragged into this war, and they might also come for the jock, so he needed to be careful. Looking in the mirror, the young man thought to himself that he was still too skinny and it was good that yesterday they were attacked not by professionals, but by amateurs. After which he told Saracina that since Kagurazaki had begun to act, there was only one thing left for them to do, start hunting for members of this group. A little later, the young man tried to catch up with one of the associates of his sworn enemy. Suddenly, he tripped over a jar, fell to the ground and immediately began to make excuses that he just wanted to squeeze out some money. Our hero was not at all interested in these excuses, so he hit him as hard as he could. Another young man thanked him for saving him and bowed. Gossi thought to himself that it wasn't that he wanted to help him on purpose, he just had his own reasons for it. In the first temporary branch, Kagurazaki gathered himself an army of 100 youngsters. He had a long-standing rivalry with Kisaragi, so the tension between the factions only grew. The sadist had more disposable soldiers. Even Kisaragi understood that going head-on against such numbers was stupid. Therefore, I decided to act on the sly. In other words, he organized a hunt for Gopniks. The Mabudachi, who were Kisaragi's direct subordinates, caught Kagurazaki's associates one by one and drove them to complete despair. A sadist, he used fear to control his army. Those closest to him had to maintain the image of invincible soldiers. This is one of the main points of brainwashing. Gradually, all of his sixes began to disappear from sight, one by one. Until only Kagurazaki remained. It was unknown whether Kisaragi had planned this on purpose, but something strange happened. He practically destroyed his opponent's mental health. The young man began to fear more and more that he would become the next target, so he surrounded himself with a lot of cannon fodder. The sadist was completely focused on his enemy. Even those around him noticed that he was too scared as he kept 100-man guard around him around the clock. In other words, he acted rashly and thus exposed his fear. The second years, from the very beginning, obeyed him only because they were afraid. This is how he lost his army. After that, the Kisaragi group beat him to a pulp, turning him practically into mincemeat. The next target of our hero began to say that he was simply engaged in telephone fraud. Why beat him because of this? The young man replied that he didn't do anything to him personally, but he was Kagurazaki's friend, so there was no other way. But then he realized that fraud was a good enough reason for beating him and hit the guy in the face. To himself, Gossi thought that he hated using Kisaragi's methods, but there were now about 50 youngsters in the Kagurazaki army and they all obeyed him out of fear. This is the most reliable way to put it in place. The hunt must continue while it is effective, because it will help change Chisato's tragic future. A few days later, at a meeting with his entourage, there was a heavy silence. Kagurazaki was all on edge. He jumped out of his seat, ran up to one of his relatives and grabbed him by the collar and said that if they had any problems with him or didn't like something, then let them tell him about it straight to his face. Smirking, the young man replied that it looked like his boss would soon come to an end. Getting even more angry, the sadist shouted, "Who dared to tell him such nonsense?" The guy replied that the boss was trying to get to the vice captain of the Mad Bulls, but in fact now only all his associates are raking it in. Then he asked where all his sixes had gone. Maybe they've already gotten rid of everyone, and he's left all alone. This is simply incredible, and it seems that no one is afraid of Kagurazaki in this school anymore. Along the way, the sadist really came to an end, and even such a blockhead like him can say so openly. Having listened to him in silence, Kagurazaki kicked him in the torso so hard that the young man flew into the window, which cracked. The fragile glass could not stand it, and the young man flew down, shouting that this was the 3rd floor. The other guys were horrified and couldn't believe their eyes that their classmate had been thrown downstairs. Leaving the class, Kagurazaki said that if everyone else came at him and said stupid things, they would end up the same way. A little later, the leader went to the headquarters of the Black Angels, which was located in an abandoned factory in the Bay Area. He had a conversation with their leaders, the Kamiya brothers. Tsukiya said that it would be unwise to start a full-scale war against Mad Bulls. The second brother Nato, who was also the vice captain, preferred to listen silently for now. The leader continued that it was one thing to hunt Saracina. They gave their consent, from the very beginning, only because their name should not have appeared anywhere in this story. Kagurazaki it already cost 1 million. But it's another thing when a young man comes here and invites them to carry out a massacre just like that. The guy replied that he only paid him so much money because Tsukiya was able to draw a large crowd in a short time. His own army, at the moment, does not yet have the courage to organize showdowns in the streets. After which he took out an envelope and put it on the table, saying that naturally he was ready to pay for everything if they agreed to his request. It contained 4 million yen and this could not but interest the leader of the Black Angels. Tsukiya objected that the Crazy Bulls have a group of more than 100 people. If they undertake this, there will be no guarantee that they will win and not lose, so this amount is not enough. Kagurazaki replied that he understood that this was not enough, but it was just an advance. The Mad Bull slaughter is the final part of the plan. First, he wants the Black Angels to attack all the students of the Tehran school. The leader asked that this was not his school and why attack his own territory. Suddenly, the second brother, who had been silent all the time, asked if the young man really wanted to take up protection. Kagurazaki replied that the guy is very smart. He himself will exert pressure inside the school, and the Black Angels outside. Thus, gradually, all high school students will become members of the Black Angels group. Tsukiya continued that once they became gang members, they would have to pay a tax in order to avoid beatings. The sadist explained that from the 1st to the 3rd year, approximately 300 or 400 students study. If you take 5,000 yen a month from everyone, it will come out to more than 2 million. If he manages to establish himself in a position of authority, then they will have an uninterrupted source of income until his release. But standing in their way is Saracina, who is too much in favor of his outdated morals and honor. And behind him are the crazy bulls, the same gang of bikers as the Black Angels. Brothers must understand perfectly well that they live as a pack. Tsukiya thought that indeed, if they pulled off such a scheme with Miharu, then he would not leave it so easily. After which, he asked what share Kaguradzaki wanted. He replied that the profit would be shared in half. Nato replied that the share would be 70 to 30, and of course in their favor. The sadist replied that whatever the percentage was, we can assume that they agreed. After which, they shook hands. While playing sports, Gossi thought that since he started hunting for Kaguradzaki informers, he stopped showing up at school, which means everything is going according to plan. Rumors even spread that the guy had lost his throne. But, nevertheless, his name still remained in the notebook, and because of this there was a very bad feeling. Putting the glass in front of our hero, Saracina said that it was freshly squeezed orange juice. Its acid relieves muscle fatigue well. The young man thanked him and thought to himself that this guy is a real good-natured person. His housekeeping skills are so good it's almost annoying. Miharu reported that the situation began to worsen. Gossi asked what he meant. Kachek replied that thanks to him, the Kaguradzaki gang calmed down, but the Black Angels became active instead. Sadist, the guy is not from the poor. He probably used his parents' money to buy them. Now, this gang of bikers is hunting the students of Tehran school. If they see a school uniform from this educational institution, they attack without even thinking. The young man asked him to stop because he didn't understand where the money could come from. He remembered that in another timeline, Kaguradzaki was kicked out of his house just because he wanted to steal some money from his parents, so he then lived with his grandparents. Our hero realized that history had changed again and did not know what to expect next. Suddenly, Saracina's mobile phone started ringing. Someone called him. After listening to his interlocutor, Miharu told Gossi that things had simply gotten worse. Meanwhile, Kaguradzaki met with the Kamiya brothers again. Tsukiya said that the hunt for Tehran schoolchildren is in full swing, but what should they do with the crazy bulls? The young man replied that first he needed to eliminate Miharu. It is necessary to use this against him. The leader said that there is no need to argue here, with this thing, even a gorilla like Saracina can be neutralized with one blow. But, does Kaguradzaki dare to do this? The guy was indignant whether Tsukiya understood who he was talking to. Of course he can do it. Not even that, he is generally the only one who can dare to do such madness. Besides, Saracina may be the main puppeteer, but this guy is responsible for the attack on his subordinates. After which, he showed the photo on his phone. It is unknown what kind of dirty tricks this small fry uses, but this couple is already in his throat. He has already lost almost 5 million. Therefore, he cannot sleep peacefully until he has extracted the entire amount from them, to the last penny. Looking at the group of guys crouching, Gossi asked what exactly was going on here. Is this really the bad deed Saracina was talking about? Suddenly, one of the guys took off and started running towards him, shouting how dare he address Bro Miharu like that. But he was sharply punched in the head by a Mussulman who said that only Gossi could call him bro. Why don't they listen to what he tells them? Our hero asked who all these people were they really second and third year students from Tirana? Saracina replied that, yes, and they are also members of the Crazy Bulls group. The young man who tried to attack him proudly reported that Miharu personally invited them to join his gang. After which he said that initially, Saracina should have become the head of the Tehran school. But then, he became vice-captain of the Crazy Bulls and decided not to play on two fronts, so he even refused to support the graduates. Bro Miharu is just an amazing person. Gossi turned to the Mussulman and asked what he said about the fact that the students of their school were being hunted, but the young man remained silent. Instead, that guy said that Miharu adheres to the old concepts and in Tehran everyone should be a mountain for each other, so the idiocy that is going on cannot be ignored. Even now, bro, he's trying to find a way to deal with this hunt. He is a very good person. Not only he and Gossi, but all the other guys will never leave him in trouble and will fight with him to the end. Saracina said that it was enough to praise him already, and our hero thought to himself that, strangely enough, he was already starting to like this bunch. He felt at ease with them. Then, Miharu said that today there will be a meeting of the top of the Crazy Bulls. Would the young man want to join them? Gossi did not expect to hear such a proposal and asked, Kasek said that he has strength and courage, and is not a bad guy himself. He verified this by personal example. And the most important thing is that he is an athlete, and a non-smoker. A true embodiment of a strong spirit in a healthy body. In the near future, they will have to fight Kaguradzaki and the Black Angels, so he wants to introduce Gossi to the leaders of the Mad Bulls. In other words, Miharu wants him to join them if he wants. Our hero thought to himself that the Bulls, the most famous gang of bikers and their vice-captain, were personally inviting him to become a member of their group. In a past life, this could not even be dreamed of, because it was simply impossible. The young man began to reach out to shake Saracina's hand, but for some reason he could not do it. Our hero did not show that he was very happy, so he answered out loud that he needed to think. Then, the young man got ready to go home and said goodbye to the jock, saying that they would see each other again tomorrow. On the way, the guy thought that he already knew what exactly he would answer to this proposal. His main goal is to save Chisato. You don't have to be completely alone to do this. He was able to win the respect of the vice-captain of the Mad Bulls himself. For any Gopnik, this is tantamount to a lucky ticket. But the most important thing was that he really liked this old man. Perhaps he did not agree right away because it was very difficult for him to openly admit his desires to himself. Meanwhile, Kaguradzaki was racing at high speed on his motorcycle and laughing loudly. The sadist purposefully wanted to knock down the vice president of Crazy Bulls to death. The young man was thrown high into the air from such a powerful blow. He fell to the ground, bleeding, and did not move. Our hero really regretted that that day he did not go with him. At night, Gossi was again tormented by a terrible dream about the very day when the Tokyo incident occurred. Even before the time jump, there wasn't a day when flashbacks didn't torment him. But, for some reason, lately, there have been more and more gaps in his memories. It dawned on him that on that very day, his close friend tried to protect his sister. The guy remembers that this man was even taken to the hospital that day with serious injuries. Finally, he managed to remember that it was Saracina Miharu. The young man got up from his bed and went to the table, in the drawer of which lay that notebook with notes on the investigation. After looking through it, he found that it was written that the number of deaths was unknown, and the jock was taken to the hospital. The guy didn't understand why he forgot such an important detail. But then, everything written about his friend began to disappear from the notebook. Gossi didn't understand why, if Miharu was no longer in danger of dying in a hospital bed. Suddenly, a phone call rang. On the other end of the line he was informed that Saracina was hit by a motorcycle and he was seriously injured. Gossi, along with the guys, immediately rushed to the hospital. Miharu lay under 4 drips in an unconscious state. One of them said that the muscleman had a cervical spine injury and, at best, he would remain a vegetable for life. Holding his hand tightly, the young man understood why his friend disappeared from the list of those killed in the Tokyo incident. All because another incident awaited him. Is there really no chance to save Saracina now? Our hero will never forgive Kaguradzaki for this. Another of his traditions. The sadist used a special attack on a motorcycle. The young man knew about this trick since the time of the first timeline. You need to make contact with the target, and then lure him into a dark alley. And while the victim's visibility is impaired, it's unexpected and mean to run into her from behind. To perform such a stunt in a narrow alley, little driving experience is not enough. This situation is like two peas in a pod. If he had been with him then, he would have been able to feel something was wrong. One of the guys put his hand on Gossi's shoulder and said that he understood how the young man was feeling now. After which, he offered to go with them to a meeting of crazy bulls. This time, the young man did not think for a second and answered that, of course, he was all for it, because he was very sorry that last time he hesitated to answer. Suddenly, our hero received a message from Kagurazaki, from his sister's number, which said that they had Chisato. If he didn't want her to get hurt, then he should come to the abandoned warehouse at 11 o'clock. The young man got angry and thought that this was no longer funny. There was an urgent need to act. A little later, the guys told what happened to the head of the attacking squad of crazy bulls, Kidzi Matsaka. He replied that since Miharu suffered, now this is their war. But he added that this very night they will not act in any way. Because, at the moment, there are about 4 people in the meeting. They can call a maximum of another 40. There are about 100 people on the enemy side and, in addition, Kidzi cannot reach their leader by phone. Their gang will only be able to attack the day after tomorrow. The guys began to be indignant that that group had kidnapped Gossi's sister and they had to do something as soon as possible. Matsaka replied that he understood everything, but this guy was not from a gang. He cannot afford to take such risks for the sake of an outsider, without the approval of the leader. Our hero, after listening to this, replied that he was satisfied with everything. He didn't count on much. Then he turned around and started to leave, saying that he just came here to talk and thank you for listening. But he stopped and thought that 1 man against 100, he couldn't cope and it would be easier to just go and commit suicide. If he freaks out now and leaves, then his return will be of no use and his sister will not be saved. Meanwhile, Iki Yatsuki, whom the schoolchildren called the strongest in the world, was quietly having lunch in the cafeteria. Suddenly, he heard a conversation between 2 friends about some very strong guy who caught the eye of the Black Angels and might soon be gone. Iki ran up to them to look at the photo of this guy and recognized him as the same young man from the alley. One of the friends was indignant that Yatsuki, as always, appears unexpectedly and at the wrong time. Smiling, the young man asked in what place and at what time they were going to kill this man. One of them, confused, replied that it seemed to be in an abandoned factory near the pier at Maidzima 13. After this, Iki turned to the second young man and said that he knew the Black Angels, so let him take him straight to them. The student did not understand why he needed this. Did he really want to watch what would happen? Yatsuki replied that he didn't see anything wrong with everyone going to the show together. Moreover, if they were going to kill this young man anyway, then why not try it himself? Our hero arrived at the specified time at the right place and stood in front of its doors, thinking that just one more step and the massacre would begin. But he will have to do this for the sake of his beloved sister Chisato. He couldn't let her get hurt again. Entering the room, the young man saw Kagurazaki and the Kamiya brothers, behind whom stood a huge crowd of people. Seeing all this, the young man noted that everything looked quite spectacular. The sadist laughed and said that the guy really decided to come all alone. He's probably so scared that he can't even squeeze out words. Looking in one direction, Gossi saw a tied-up Chisato, who had a bag placed on her head. And looking at the other one, he noticed in the crowd the same strong guy he had encountered in the alley. Kagurazaki was indignant at how our hero still has enough time to stand and turn his head in different directions. Instead of worrying about your sister, it would be better to think about what will happen to him personally now. After which, the sadist gave the order, forward, and a crowd of youngsters rushed towards Gossi. The young man instantly knocked out one of them with a simple blow to the jaw. After which, with all his might, he kicked the next attacker. In a very short time, the young man neutralized everyone who wanted to attack him. Kagurazaki and the Kamiya brothers were taken aback by what they saw. Tsukiya said that 4 direct punches to the jaw with such precision and speed is simply incredible. The sadist said that he did not know what tricks the young man used, but they apparently made him very strong. But there are more than 100 people in this room, and no matter how powerful he is, he will never defeat everyone. Suddenly, someone began to make his way through the crowd and said that people should move so that he could pass. Approaching Kagurazaki, Iki Yatsuki said that he had his own unresolved issues with this boy, so he would be the first to take on him. Our hero looked at him and couldn't believe his eyes. Was the nicest young man in the world really working for the Black Angels? Hearing Tsukiya calling him, Iki turned and asked if he had anything against it. The man replied yes. It doesn't matter how strong he thinks he is. This area belongs to the Black Angels. Yatsuki started to get angry because he didn't understand what the man meant. One of the Kamiya brothers explained that if he wanted to take part in the punishment, he had to follow the rules. Iki replied that now he understood what he was talking about, but he only joined this game tonight. Having defected to Gasi's side, with a couple of his friends, Yatsuki declared that he was not an ally of our hero, but for the moment decided to take his side. Kagurazaki and Tsukiya never expected this turn of events and were very surprised. Iki added that he wouldn't want his toy to break in such a place. Then, looking at Gasi, he added that he had fallen in love and could not do anything about it. One of the friends of the strongest guy in the world went and took Chisato and held her in his arms. Yatsuki said that now it was clear who was good and who was bad, because it was not for nothing that their gang was nicknamed the Saints. Our hero was perplexed by what was happening. Had he really encountered another group like Miharu? Kagurazaki stated that Iki, of course, was nicknamed Invincible, but he generally understands that there are more than 100 people in this room. Yatsuki replied that he really didn't think they could beat his youngsters. Don't worry so much, because they have Gasi. Suddenly, the guys began to hear some very loud rumble that was rapidly approaching. Kagurazaki did not understand what was happening, but then the doors suddenly opened and bikers began to enter the room. It was a group of crazy bulls, ahead of which the bandaged Saracena rushed and shouted that he had brought help. Some of the sadists' charges immediately asked to run wherever they could. Miharu greeted our hero, but he, out of shock, only asked the question of how he ended up here, because the doctors said that he would remain a vegetable. Smiling, the jock replied that how could he doubt the strength of his muscles? With his training, it would take something stronger than a motorcycle to damage his vertebrae. Wiping away the tears that welled up in his eyes, Gasi said that he was a real gorilla. Saracena started to get off the motorcycle, but lost his balance and fell to one knee. Giving him his hand, Gasi said that he was very pleased with all this, but was Miharu sure that everything was okay with him? After all, he is just after such a terrible accident. Kasek replied that, of course. Together they must show them the strength of a healthy, non-smoking body. Noticing Yatsuki, Saracena said that the fun was in full swing. Our hero said that, since he had just escaped from the hospital, how did he manage to gather so many people in such a short time? Kasek pointed to the guys who went with Gasi to the biker meeting and said that they did their best. They didn't waste any time and called everyone they could. One of them replied that if Bro Miharu were in their place, he would never leave the young man in trouble, therefore, the worse they are. Be that as it may, 50 Mad Bulls and 10 Saints appeared on the Gasi side. Events began to take an unexpected turn. Now the young man had great support behind him. One of Kagurazaki's wards shouted that this guy was bad at counting, because there were no more than 60 of them, and in his gang there were 100. The sadist abruptly stuck a huge awl into his leg, which he did not let go of his hands the entire time, and ordered him to shut up. Kagurazaki thought that 50 crazy bulls were all right, but the problem was that there were 10 more saints on their side. They have vast experience in hand-to-hand combat. The group consists of the most dangerous fighters. Even alone, each of them is capable of capturing an entire educational institution. Ikki Yatsuki is a legend, and became famous for the fact that he single-handedly killed as many as 30 people, but it was not known for sure whether this was true or not. Plus, if we take into account what he saw, Gossi could easily put about 10 people in his lungs, and Saracina is generally a solid mountain of muscles. If it comes to a fight, then there is no way for them to get out, and losing is very likely. Therefore, the sadist raised his finger up and said that he had a proposal for them. Miharu asked which one. Kagurazaki said the fight would not resolve their issues and would only increase tension between the parties. Then he asked why the jocks don't want there to be even more victims. Saracina replied that something like this was expected and asked what proposal he had. The young man proposed to choose the 3 strongest people from each group and arrange a fight only between them. The strongest guy in the world, the vice-captain of a biker gang, and our hero looked at each other. Ikki replied that he didn't even know what he was talking about or that he was completely crazy. Kagurazaki thought that Yatsuki is not a person, but a fighting machine, and those two are incredibly strong. In battle, he and his gang do not mix well. And if he is right, then these old-fashioned, narrow-minded people should fall for his plan. After some thought, Yatsuki stated that he liked this idea better than just a random fight. After which, he turned to Gossi and asked if he had any objections. Scratching the back of his head, the young man replied that, in principle, everything suited him and he agreed. Ikki immediately picked up that they had decided this moment, but Saracina was indignant that he also had the right to vote, and his opinion was not asked. Yatsuki asked if something really didn't suit him, but the Kachek replied that he had nothing against it, but they just had to consult with him anyway. Kagurazaki then said that they would split as follows: himself against Gossi, Saracina against Zukiya, and Yatsuki against Nato. The sadist reasoned to himself that the younger Kamiya practices judo and also played rugby, but the most important thing is that he is a heavyweight. His rival, small Ikki. He may have become famous in street fights, but he has no experience in martial arts. Just a couple of hits will be enough. Playing rugby has toughened Nato up, so he won't be knocked down so easily. If you fall into his hands, you can say goodbye to your life, because what will happen next is either a throw over the shoulder or a choke hold. Plus, he has very sharp eyesight. In other words, if he gets down to business seriously, he can kill 15 people alone. Yatsuki was already tired of waiting and he asked if it was finally possible to start. After which, he instantly flew up to this thug and hit him on the temple with his palm so that he lost his orientation in space. Then, without wasting a second, he swung his fist and punched him in the face as hard as he could. In just an instant, the youngest of the Kamiya brothers was defeated and was lying on the ground, unconscious. Kagurazaki, Saracina and Zukiya were taken aback by what was happening and watched silently, with their mouths open. Ikki thought to himself that this is how he really hits, and Gossi simply managed to dodge during a skirmish in the alley, because in fact, he can kill with one blow. The young man also stood with his mouth open and asked a silent question: what had just happened? But this was not the only question in my head. He didn't understand how this was possible with such a body, how an ordinary person could even be capable of this. His blows are not subject to any laws at all. There were a million more questions, but the only thing our hero could think about was that Ikki was not hitting at full strength. Meanwhile, Saracina and Zukiya had already begun their fight. Kagurazaki turned to Gossi and said that they had already started a fight, maybe it was time for them. The sadist added that the older Kamiya practices boxing, so the stupid jock Miharu, with muscles instead of brains, is not his opponent at all. Then, he licked the awl and said that he personally was invincible and he had the courage to pierce our hero's eyeball right through, so he was no rival to him either. After this, Kagurazaki rushed to attack the young man, who noted that it seemed that the enemy was not joking. The young man managed to calmly dodge the tip without getting hurt. But, suddenly, the sadist, sticking out his tongue, took out a pepper spray and began to spray it. Meanwhile, Saracina missed blows one after another, which the opponent did not stop delivering for a second. Tsukiya laughed from his stand and stated that it was immediately obvious that he was an amateur and not a professional. After delivering another blow, the elder Kamaya began to feel some kind of uncomfortable feeling. But I quickly cast aside these thoughts and thought that this guy was a newbie. He's like a meaty punching bag, just helpless. Then, I realized that no matter how many blows he threw, Saracina did not move a millimeter from his place. Miharu, at this time, thought that at the moment almost all of his brothers were watching him and he could not disgrace himself in front of them. The most important thing for him is to keep his crystal jaw, he can endure everything else. This pain cannot be compared with his stubbornness. He's not the best street fighter. After all the thinking, Miharu tried to grab his opponent. It was necessary to wait for the right moment, grab the opponent and, with the help of hardened muscles, lift him into the air. Then, holding him tightly so that he cannot escape, jump high up. After which, throw over the head so that the opponent loses consciousness from the blow. Having finished with his enemy, Saracina declared that in a healthy body there is a healthy mind and this blow is direct proof of this. Meanwhile, Gossi covered his face with his hand from the spray can and thought that it was necessary to move away from the spray radius with his eyes closed. In this way, the problem will be quickly resolved and the young man will be able to see everything. Our hero said that the fight between them was already pointless, because they already had 2 victories to their credit. Kagurazaki got angry and took out a knife and began to ask if he was being mocked for an hour. How dare a guy underestimate him and consider him worthless? It doesn't matter how strong a person's fists are or the fact that he can easily throw a person over his head. If you hit him with a knife like his, he will never get out. The sadist will kill him as long as he has the determination to kill and no fists will help against his cold steel. Our hero thought that the blade was about 30 centimeters and if he hit it, the wound would be very deep and no matter where it hit, he could die immediately. Each match has its own rules. He, as a participant, was very interested in the topic of self-defense against an armed enemy and the rules for protecting athletes. The guy began to remember his conversation with Mikumi Maeda, who with one glance realized that Gossi was very strong. They developed a combination of arresting and hand-to-hand combat techniques from the Japanese defense forces together. But why? The young man wants to study the technique of neutralizing armed opponents. It's a huge combination of different techniques. To participate in tournaments, you just need to train within the established rules. Our hero replied that he really wants to become even stronger and he has a number of his own reasons for this. Looking at Kagurazaki running with a knife, the guy thought that even though he had a weapon, it was just a knife. Until he takes out a long-range weapon, it is necessary to engage him in close combat. After trying to stab him with a knife, Gossi thought that his movements were slower than a regular boxer's punch, which meant he was an amateur. As long as he is concentrated, he can easily track all his actions. Then he decided that he needed to quickly grab him by the arm and throw him to the floor so that he could not do anything else. The young man was able to do this with ease, and the enemy was practically neutralized. Already lying on the floor, Kagurazaki admitted his defeat and said that enough was enough, he needed to stop, because the young man had defeated him. Looking at how our hero swung, the sadist began to say that he could really continue to beat him, because he could die like that. But the guy started hitting him in the face and saying that if he took a weapon in his hands, then he shouldn't expect mercy. Looking at the unconscious leader, the guy added that when a person is so determined to kill, he must be prepared for the fact that he too can be killed. After the final victory, everyone present began to shout loudly and rejoice that they had won. After some time, Ikki and our hero got together to have dinner. Looking at all this, Gossi asked how to understand this. Yatsuki replied that they would celebrate the victory, whatever else it might look like. The young man objected that the celebration took place yesterday. Ikki replied that he thought that it wouldn't be bad to go to the guy's house and play, because he likes him. Our hero asked in surprise, in what sense? The strongest man in the world replied that practically no one could fight him back, so naturally he began to watch him. Gossi decided to clarify whether he was going to fight him. Yatsuki replied that no, he would not do anything bad to him. The young man asked what was the point of all this then. Ikki replied that at the moment, he is not yet in his prime. His real strength is much greater than his current one, so he will wait for a while. The thought flashed through Gossi's mind that this guy had helped for a reason. The doors to the room opened and Saracina came in, with a package in his hand, and apologized for keeping him waiting so long. After which, he began to take out 2 kilograms of Makasaka beef from him at 7,000 yen per 100 grams and said that they could eat as much as they wanted. Gossi exclaimed that he was seriously rich. Kachek only laughed in response. The doors to the room opened again and Chisato entered, announcing that she had brought ponzu sauce. When he saw her, Miharu froze, as if he had stopped noticing everyone around him. When the pause was already too long, Saracina abruptly stood up from his seat. Then he said that life, which is given by heaven, will end sooner or later. Their meeting took place in the prime of their youth, so let the girl allow their flower of love to bloom. Taking her hands, he added that he would put her on his motorcycle and the two of them would race along the highway of love. Gossi felt Spanish shame and thought that he was a complete idiot and said such nonsense. Then the guys continued their gatherings. We talked and fooled around a lot. Since his return in time, this was the first time he laughed so sincerely. When it was already quite late, Gossi saw off his dear guests and they went home. Returning to his room, he decided to check what was written in the notebook, because now Kageradzuka should no longer have anything to do with the Chisato case. The young man saw that the future had changed. There were no further reports of victims or suspects. But the young man's attention was attracted by other inscriptions and it seemed to him that they had not been there before. It was written about an incident related to the Tokyo incident. The deceased was listed as Saracina Miharu. It happened on September 28, but it was yesterday and the jock is alive. Meanwhile, the doctor looked at Miharu's chart and said that during the initial examination, they discovered that he had a severe injury to his cervical vertebrae. There is only one outcome for such an injury, a vegetative state. The nurse replied that they both saw his X-ray and there were definitely such severe injuries. They didn't understand what it was, an illusion or something else, because when they look at the picture again now, they don't see any injuries. The girl added that Saracina came to them in critical condition, and after a couple of hours he ran out as if nothing had happened to him. The nurse on duty reported this information to her. The man added that he heard that before the young man came to his senses and stood up, some kind of black shadow appeared over his bed. This is very difficult to believe. At this time, the strongest man in the world met with Kisaragi on the roof of the building. The boss asked how he enjoyed fighting a world-class fighter. Late at night, the young man was sleeping peacefully in his room. Unbeknownst to him, the footage of the Tokyo incident had resurfaced, with his sister still the victim and Ikki Yatsuki the suspect. Meanwhile, Kisaragi repeated his question about how he enjoyed fighting such a world-class fighter. Ikki laughed and said that he came again with his stupid jokes. Where could he have seen a high school student with such skill? It's hard to argue with the fact that Gossi is a very strong guy, but he has not yet fully revealed his full potential. Kisaragi asked that how to understand this was not fully revealed. Ikki replied that he himself still doesn't fully understand, but it feels like he should be much stronger. It seems that he is missing something. For example, muscles. At the moment, there is something terribly wrong about him, as if his physical form cannot keep up with his mind. Perhaps his muscles atrophied during hospitalization, after some accident. Kisaragi thought to himself that this young man was a real monster, because he was able to notice so many details in just one meeting. He said out loud that this version does not fit because Gossi was never hospitalized. Yatsuki was not particularly upset that his guesses were not confirmed and replied that it was fine. The boss asked if he had thought well of his offer, which had come a little earlier. Ikki asked if he meant joining forces to create a powerful, fighting force. Kisaragi replied that it is not very appropriate to call it a combat unit, a street gang is more appropriate. Yatsuki replied that if this is his plan, then the idea should be very interesting, but there is one thing. The boss began to get angry and say that the young man really decided to give up. The most powerful man in the world said that Kisaragi was talking about how he could make a lot of money out of it. But his main business is trafficking in drugs and young schoolgirls. Kisaragi replied that he would run the business himself. The guy just needs to use his fists sometimes. He just wants the greatest legend to join his group. Even his presence alone will be enough for the gang to begin to expand. Without thinking twice, Yatsuki replied that he did not want to take part in this and he gave up. Because playing with Gossi and old man Saracena is much more interesting and fun. After which, he turned around and began to leave. Kisaragi noted to himself that the influence of that young man began to spread and the world turned upside down. The next day, on the way to school, our hero clutched an expander in his hand. Glancing at the local students, he thought that nothing had changed. This school was and remains the worst. 3 guys appeared in front of the young man, and he could not understand what they wanted from him, had they really decided to fight. But, suddenly, they bowed and wished good morning. The guy was taken aback by this and did not understand what was happening to them. The guys started chattering that they had heard about how he dealt with the Black Angels. The young man went there alone, and then they unwound them dry. This is simply legendary. Our hero noted that rumors spread around the school at breakneck speed. Then he saw that everyone around him began to bow to him, and it was so unusual, because before he had never been considered anything at all. Previously, I didn't even consider him a person, but all I had to do was get into trouble with a gang once, and everything changed dramatically. And then Saracena approached the young man, and they greeted each other, calling each other by name. The guys were taken aback by the fact that our hero addressed Boss Miharu by name, because he is a whole year younger than him, which means he recognized him as his spiritual brother. As the friends walked towards the entrance, the students bowed to them, called them bosses and thanked them for dealing with the group that had been terrorizing their school for so long. Gossi thought to himself that mentally he was already over 30. From such an attitude and praise, it became extremely awkward, but it was not so bad. Saracena told our hero that he was as always. The young man did not understand what he was talking about and asked what Kachek meant. Miharu replied that he is always so amazing. The young man responded to this by saying that he does not deny that he is a clever guy. But the vice captain of the biker gang said that this is not what he means and he is not talking about force. Our hero was confused after what he heard. Saracena continued speaking. That you need to have a decent amount of nerves to go save your sister alone against such a crowd. Recalling his training and achievements, Gossi replied that this is why he became strong. Kachek added that he thought he had more than enough fighting spirit, but he is not at all sure that he could have done the same in his place. He very much doubts that he could dare to do such a thing. This really deserves respect, and Gossi is truly an amazing guy. But Saracena is still waiting for an answer to their last conversation, before all this showdown. Our hero asked what he was talking about. Miharu asked if the young man remembered that he wanted to introduce him to the top of the Crazy Bulls. The young man replied that there was such a thing and whether he wanted to invite him to join their group. Kachek replied that, to put it simply, yes. He admires Gossi, so if the young man is going to continue being a gopnik, then wouldn't he want to be on the same team with him? The young man noted to himself that the guy was really old-fashioned in everything and answered, "Okay," and shook his hand in return. After this, our hero asked what and when this long-awaited meeting with the top was scheduled. But Miharu replied that there was no need to worry about it. The young man did not understand why, because the jock himself wanted them to meet together. Then, Saracena silently pointed his finger down at the four guys who were heading towards the school. All the schoolchildren immediately began to discuss what could have happened, that the entire top of the crazy bulls, including their leader, came to their school. Have they really decided to start a showdown? One of the students replied that he practically runs the school anyway, so the true purpose of their coming is not clear. The young man looked down with his mouth open in surprise and asked what it all meant. Miharu replied that this is exactly what it means. Since Gasi himself did not want to go to the top, she decided to come to him herself. The guys immediately went down to talk to them. The leader of the Mad Bulls was called Onikami Zaiudzi, also known as the God of Darkness. He said that he and Miharu had already discussed this issue. Gasi will serve as an advisor to the commander of the Second Strike Force. Now this will be his title. Our hero was again taken aback by what he heard, because if we talk about the top of the crazy bulls, then they are all considered the elite among the gopniks. The young man asked whether everything would be so simple or that he should do something. And in general they have a gang of bikers, and the young man, unfortunately, only has a moped. Onikami replied that a moped would also do, but he seemed to have an old bike lying around in his garage, so if the guy wanted, he could give it to him. Gasi thought to himself that he was really serious or something, but asked out loud if he could ask one question. In response, he heard what exactly interests him. Then the young man said that they had really come such a long way here just to meet him. Why should he be so honored? Zaiudzi replied that the commander's advisor plays an important role. As the guy is heard, they often conflict with the group from Chiba. At this rate, it is very close to the massacre. Their last fight of 3 duels has already become a legendary event. Gasi joining their gang will add to their authority. The young man asked if the God of Darkness meant that he would be some kind of bouncer. Onikami replied that you can say so, but it's better not to take the showdown between factions to extremes. Gasi is Miharu's friend, and he has already earned his trust, which means he can definitely be trusted. Looking at the slightly blushing Saracena, the young man noted that this old man was very popular. Then, the God of Darkness bowed to our hero. He was simply shocked by what he saw. Zaiudzi said that he was aware that the young man alone went against a gang of 100 people, and this cannot but deserve respect. That's why he wants him in his gang, no matter what. This is a completely logical desire, in this situation. All the schoolchildren who watched this picture could not believe their eyes that the legendary God of Darkness bowed before Gasi. The young man felt completely awkward, and he finally asked to raise his head. Then he added that he couldn't force a person of his level to do something like that. Onikami asked what the answer would be to his offer to join their ranks. The young man replied that the advisor to the commander of the strike force was now at his service. Zaiudzi clenched his fist victoriously and exhaled with great relief, because he had succeeded. Then, he shouted that he was Onikami Zaiudzi, the leader of the Crazy Bulls. His gang decided to accept Gasi, a second-year student at Tehran School, into their ranks. He will be entrusted with the duties of an advisor to the commander of the strike force. In other words, from this moment on, he becomes a member of their large family, and they are happy to welcome him into their ranks. The students couldn't believe their ears that Gasi was now officially part of the Mad Bulls. The guy thought to himself that now, with the support and influence of this group, he would be able to protect Chisato, no matter what, and this thought comforted him very much. A little later, in his house, the guy decided to look at the notebook and saw that an inscription appeared about the victim, who was his sister, and the suspect was Iki Yatsuki. The young man was very surprised, as he thought that this event had already been completely erased. But, at the moment, the most important question was why it was written about Yatsuki. The guy understood absolutely nothing and first decided to call him on his mobile. Iki picked up the phone and said that he couldn't talk right now since he had a dog fight on TV that he wanted to watch. But, Gossi said that he had an important conversation with him that could not be postponed. Yatsuki asked what could be more important than dog fighting. Next, the young man began to have a normal conversation with him and talk about his training and so on in order to unobtrusively find out the information that interested him. So that Iki would not suspect anything, the young man asked him about different things. For example, about whether he likes exploding bellies, because this is his favorite comedy duo. Yatsuki liked him too, so the guy said that he couldn't even believe that he was such a fan of humor. But then, looking at himself in the mirror, the young man thought that in general now was not the time to have fun. Therefore, he said that it was getting late and he needed to call it a day. After which, he thanked Iki for talking to him. From the conversation, Gossi realized that Yatsuki despises abuse of girls and Chisato is absolutely indifferent to him. It's only Miharu who has warm feelings for her. Our hero made such a conclusion because the strongest man in the world did not understand what was the point of him running after girls if they themselves did not give him a pass. It's hard to imagine that such a handsome man as he would despair and stoop to the point where he would have to chase women for pleasure. After everything he heard, the young man finally stopped understanding what was really happening. Meanwhile, Kisaragi reflected that Iki had confirmed his fears. With every extra action, the future began to change. Gossi seems to be the main driver of change. Now he is on the trail of potential criminals who committed evil on his sister. But, if he is a time traveler, then the investigation of his sister's case would not end there. He should have focused on the Tokyo incident. Gossi should know that at that time they teamed up with Iki, but for some reason he doesn't even lift a finger in their direction. It looks like he doesn't know what happened then. Plus, Saracina acted with this guy as if they had never met before. And Gossi himself seemed to know only about Miharu, that he was the vice-captain of the Mad Bulls and nothing more. Kisaragi also thought that the strangest thing was the car accident incident. The young man knew about this, but for some reason he did not try to do anything to prevent it. It was as if he didn't know what was going to happen. Logically, it turns out that he remembers only key events from the already created time branch. In this game, the main variables are Saracina Miharu and Iki Yatsuki. Either Gossi only has vague memories of them, or something prevents him from knowing more about them. This means that he has the ability, a time jump, or the guy is able to see random fragments of the future. But no matter how hard the young man tries, Kisaragi will still remain the winner in this game. Our hero looked at the notepad in confusion and did not understand what was really happening. Yatsuki's words flared up in his head that there was no point in him chasing women, because they themselves constantly do not give him a pass. He hates abuse of women and, besides, Chisato is his younger sister. The guy feels absolutely nothing for her, and this young man is still silent about the fact that Miharu has fallen head over heels in love with her. Gossi came to the conclusion that it was not in Iki's character to bully girls. The current one is not capable of this. What then could have changed him so much? Perhaps in the future something will happen that will change his character in the opposite direction. Suddenly, our hero came across records about the Carnival of Death, an event that is directly related to the Tokyo incident. The brief description said that the Mad Bulls got into a fight with a hostile gang. The battle took place on a mountain pass. Among the dead was the vice-captain of the Mad Bulls, Saracina Miharu. Iki Yatsuki, who at that time was considered the strongest among the young generation of Gopniks, in this incident fought on the side of the group of crazy bulls. The death of Miharu, one of his closest friends, took a huge toll on his psyche. When Saracina's death was finally confirmed, the young man became desperate and ran away from the scene of the fight. The Crazy Bulls group itself was completely destroyed and ceased to exist. Ikki Yatsuki no longer appeared at home and began to lead a wild lifestyle on the street, constantly getting involved in various troubles. A little later, Ikki and Toma Kisaragi teamed up and formed the Twin Moon Gang, which later became one of the most formidable in all of Ksanto. By expanding the boundaries of the territory of their possessions, the young men provoked the Tokyo incident. Suddenly, all those memories came flooding back to the young man, and he remembered who the gang of Moon Twins were who organized that terrible incident. Kisaragi, as the head, was considered almost the king of the world of Gopniks, but his appetites grew and over time, this was not enough for him and his next goal was the underworld of Japan. Usually, Gopniks end up in criminal organizations either by helping gray offices, or, if they are lucky, they can take the person who wants to as a member of 6 into one of the Yakuza clans. Kisaragi acted differently, he decided to create his own Yakuza clan. They were involved in drug trafficking and prostitution. In addition, they took underground fighting under their wing and with their financial help, very few could compete. In other words, Ikki, with his charisma as the strongest fighter in the world, and Kisaragi, with his brains that made money for them, became the two leaders. The two quickly became famous among all the Yakuza clans, and then Gossi began working for them when he began to practice martial arts on a professional level. The young man could not understand how he could forget such important information. The young man forgot about Saracina's death, as if solid black holes were appearing in his memories. Have all the memories and all the information in my head begun to adjust to the effect of time? Then, he thought that at the moment, all these thoughts would not help him in any way. But it was already good that the situation began to become more or less clear. Miharu, who was already important to him as a friend and even more so to our hero, would not want Ikki to go down the wrong path. Now, the main goal is to save Saracina and everything will be fine. It looks like he and his younger sister have a future. Kisaragi grabbed hold of him with his legs and arms. After some time, the young man went to some dark alley. Then, he walked through one of the open doors and found himself in the room where the battles were being held. In the Carnival of Death or the incident at the pass, the Mad Bulls got into a confrontation with the Chiba Alliance. Currently, there are 2 biker gangs in Chiba and both are at odds with the Mad Bull group. They do not find a common language so much that, in fact, the alliance was created to fight the Bulls. This union includes more than 200 people, while the Crazy Bulls have only 100 people. In the original story, Miharu got into a fight with Murayama, who had recently been released from a juvenile detention center and ended up there himself. While Saracina was away, the Bulls were destroyed by numbers. In that temporary thread, the jock was in prison during the Carnival of Death, so there was no way he could have died in it. In short, the Mad Bulls fell only because there were not enough people. After all, the Chiba gang specially united in an alliance in order to have a numerical advantage against them. And the heads of the groups that organized the alliance first met at one of the underground battles, which was organized by Kisaragi. This place was a gathering place for martial arts fans and gambling people who couldn't live without betting. It was the final of a one-day tournament that would result in a double knockout. After the fight, the 2 fighters became friends over the fact that they were both from Chiba and had a common eyesore. They decided to join forces to fight the Crazy Bulls. This is how the Chiba Alliance was founded. The young man thought it was very easy to solve. They just need to be prevented from meeting in the final match. Our hero left the hall and headed towards the man who was accepting bets from newly arriving people. The man bet 2,000 yen on Murashima, and the guy agreed that this was a very profitable bet for the next fight. When he was left alone, he thought that Kisaragi really knew how to make money and they already had 200,000 yen in their hands. Gossi decided that he needed to win this final by any means and then the problem would go away on its own. The underground battle arena, run by Kisaragi, is currently located under an abandoned building. The more often this fighting site changed its location, the larger it became. In the future, the arena will become a hotbed of prostitution, deals and drug trafficking. Money will spin on it, in the literal sense of the word, and this will become Toma's main source of income. My thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the guy who accepted bets. He greeted Gossi and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Our hero asked where Kisaragi is currently located. He replied that while the boss was collecting money, he might not stop by often and just for a minute. It is now very difficult to catch him, and even all his many girls do not know where he is. The chapter simply doesn't tell them about this, and not only them, but no one at all. But, in theory, Gossi himself should know, because he is one of Kisaragi's favorites. But the young man replied that he had no idea. Then he asked if it was possible to take part in betting fights suddenly. It seems that this will not work, because there is a system with advance registration for this. The young man answered yes. It is necessary to make documents for bets, and people still need time to think about who is better to bet on. The guy asked why our hero was so interested in this issue. Gossi replied that he would like to personally take part in the fight. The interlocutor was very surprised. The young man thought to himself that it seemed that after the incident with the Black Angels, the news about him had not yet completely spread. Then he said his full name, that his height was 175 centimeters, and his weight was 65 kilograms. He belongs to the average category and let him be recorded. The cashier asked if he was serious, because in the arena people really demonstrate and measure their strength. There's no need to joke like that, because this is a serious matter and he definitely won't cope. No matter how much Kisaragi doesn't like the young man, he's a weakling. Then, Takeshi Inuyama approached them. His height is 182 centimeters, weight 92 kilograms. He is 17 years old and an ordinary Japanese schoolboy. The boy said that this young man had a second dan in judo, as well as a black belt in karate. He is a true sports fanatic. In this arena, hooligans fight who want to measure their strength. They all practice boxing or some type of martial arts. If our hero is at least not like Takeshi, then no one will bet on him. This is a stupid and unprofitable idea. But, if a young man wants, he can become a public punching bag. This is only for the purpose of sanctioning some command. The public loves it and gets excited, so there's no betting on it. Gossi replied that he would not allow himself to be bullied publicly and repeated that he wanted to register. The cashier replied that the young man was Kisaragi's servant. If this is allowed, then everyone will believe that his work is being done in bad faith, and in general he will soon personally begin to mock him. The young man clarified that if Takeshi Inuyama loses to him, will they be able to register him then? The cashier replied that this was impossible, unfortunately, because the judoka was under the control of one very influential and powerful person. Inuyama, who had been silent all this time, said that let this happen, because he liked Gossi. Takeshi loves to mock the weak. The guy turned to our hero again and once again asked if he was serious. Maybe he was just under the influence of drugs. He was allowed into the Kisaragi team not because he really likes him as a person, but because they have been friends since childhood. Has he noticed that when such small fry shows off a lot and pretends that he can do everything, it irritates those around him? But, in fact, he feels selfish in the current situation, so he doesn't yet know what to do right. It's not that he wants to insult our hero, but if he is beaten now, his ardor will be pacified. Gossi asked what he had decided and whether it was possible to start a fight. The cashier replied that let the young man, such an opponent for the heavyweight Takeshi category, start. He'd better worry about that. Inuyama asked which way the guy wanted to die, with judo or karate. The cashier reminded that no one should be beaten to death. The judoka replied that there was no need to worry and that it was just an expression. Then, I wanted to clarify what Gossi chooses. Our hero responded by asking who is easier for him to defeat, the attacker or the grabber. Takeshi asked what he thought he was going for, karate or judo. It doesn't matter to him which way to win, the young man is strong in both, so he won't leave a wet spot. The young man replied that everything was clear to him, his opponent could do anything. To this Inuyama only smiled insidiously. After which, he sharply rushed towards the young man in order to strike. Gossi noted that this technique is called heikick, and it is a rather risky attack. Who does this fighter even take him for? Therefore, the young man swung his hand and prepared to strike directly in the eye with his fist. But even for those who have undergone specialized training, getting into the eye is not easy. Therefore, girls, for the purpose of self-defense, are advised to aim not at him, but at the face. That is, you need to choose one specific point and hit there. Only after this, hit with the back of your hand, like a whip, somewhere in the eye area. There is no need to try to hit the eyeball directly, because there are many other ways. After this, our hero decided to grab his opponent and throw him over his head. The opponent, who lost his orientation for a while, hit his head on the floor with all his might. When Inuyama was already semi-conscious, Gossi decided to finish him off. The young man made a powerful kick to the head, and the enemy was finally defeated. The cashier was dumbfounded by this spectacle and could not find the right words. Gossi, glancing at him, asked again if he could now take part in the battles. The young man replied that, of course. The guy thought that in the future, the goal could be achieved if he defeated one of the heads of the Chiba group, but he would probably want more. After that, he asked if he had the right to bet on himself in this match. The cashier replied that if the fight was not by agreement, then why not? Gossi replied that everyone used to think he was a weakling and this fight should be fun. The young man asked if he understood correctly that our hero wants to bet everything on himself and whether he will be able to win. The guy asked in what sense. The cashier said that their club had one invincible member. Next month, this man plans to make his debut in the professional league. He is a living legend. The young man thought that his muscles, at the moment, leave much to be desired, but in theory that fighter should not participate in this particular match. According to the guy's recollections, two leaders of groups from Chiba clashed in a duel. If a professional had appeared, this would not have happened. Then, he said goodbye to the cashier and said that it was time for him to go get ready. Meanwhile, Kisaragi received a message from our hero's interlocutor that Gossi had come to register for the fight, and that he was very strong. As expected, the young man decided to try to stop the unification of the Chiba group. Then he will force the strongest to participate in underground matches. Pros versus pros, what will come of it in the end? Meanwhile, there was a fight between two guys. One of them shouted that they were not afraid of Teiran as much as Kisaragi and Kagurazaki were no longer there. The victim replied that if he hit him like that, Miharu would not forgive him. The opponent replied that he was from Teiran, but also the vice-captain of the Mad Bulls. Outside of school, he doesn't decide matters. Even if you mistakenly touch someone from the Chiba group, then all the crazy bulls may be in danger. The guy thought to himself that he was coming from logical thoughts. Gossi, also one of the crazy bulls, and aren't they still the same, only without a leader? Teiran no longer has a leader who decided all the issues, so now they can take revenge for everything in full. They were watched by two guys, Mori and Oku, who said that these were real hooligans and they were engaged in scoring. Suddenly, the attacker flew up to them and asked why they were standing here and watching, because a beating was happening, did they really want to get it too, and grabbed Oku by the collar. Without thinking twice, the young man hit the impudent boy in the jaw with all his might. Everyone else was taken aback by what they saw and asked in surprise who the guys were. Oku replied that they were hunters of hooligans and arrived here at the right time. After which, he extended his hand and told them to give all the money they had. The young men asked what kind of money he had and what he was even talking about. The guys replied that people like hooligans always move in groups, so they won't go to the police. If rumors spread that some normies extorted money from them, then they will be ashamed to death. Even if they are some kind of mattresses who still decide to run to the police station. But, they are in the middle of a jam, and if they want to complain, nothing will come of it. Therefore, there are no other options, let them give all the money they have. Then, Mori and Oku beat everyone unconscious and started emptying their wallets. Mori said that he now had 30,000, but Oku didn't have 50, and now they could have a good time in the evening at Kabakure. One of the bullies came to his senses and asked what kind of martial arts they had just used. The guys looked at each other and answered that one of them was the champion of the prefectural judo tournament, and the second in boxing. Having not received a recommendation for university by the end of the 3rd grade, they realized that their heads were empty and they were not in danger of entering a higher educational institution, because they would not even be able to pass the exams. Then, saying that this really pisses them off, Mori kicked the guy as hard as he could. Oku picked up that they trained every day, but they received nothing in return, and this is very unfair, because they deserve to get at least something. One of the guys said that in any case, they are very grateful, because there were many opponents and it was difficult to resist them. The guys replied that in this case, instead of thanking them, let them also give away all the money they have. The victims were surprised that they were also extorting money from them. Mori said that they really thought that they would be released just like that. Then, Oku smiled and said that this is an interesting situation, because they are also hooligans. The guys were constantly busy training and they didn't have time to score, because they had something to lose, and they, not even athletes, were trying to show themselves as strongmen. Mori picked up that the young men are hanging around here and trying to demonstrate how strong they are, but no one is stronger than themselves. In fact, all bullies are just stupid, because ordinary people have something to lose. They simply cannot and will not use violence. So, if they stand up for a fight in the same ring, then what do the guys think will come out of it in the end? Then, Oku again extended his hand and repeated the phrase so that they would give them all the money. The victim thought to himself that they were both annoying, but, unfortunately, very strong. The young man asked if they really just wanted money and that's all. Mori replied that he also really wanted to beat them. After which, he grabbed the guy by the t-shirt and said that he had long wanted to try the back bend at least once. Oku laughed and said that since the guy would die immediately, he couldn't do that. Suddenly, Gossi appeared behind them and, recognizing his classmates, asked what was happening here. The guys shouted that these two call themselves bully hunters and consider their Tehran school to be some kind of joke. Oku said that since our hero is also a bully, he came at the right time. They are real athletes, and after some events, they also decided to become hooligans and extort money. The young man thought that they really looked very well trained. The guys said that now the young man must also give them all the money. After which, Oku swung his hand to hit our hero in the face. But the guy used the evasion technique, which helps neutralize someone else's blow by turning his own head. Then, the young man abruptly grabbed the confused guy by the collar in order to perform the next move. Gossi thought that a professional boxer competing would not be able to handle his throws and threw him over his shoulder. The young man, lying on the ground, shouted that his shoulder was dislocated and he was in great pain. Next, our hero began to showdown with Mori and thought that the judoka participating in the competition would not be able to cope with the blows. This is a complex system of techniques consisting of strikes, throws and grabs. It is based on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If a person is able to perform all of them, then anyone can easily be defeated, except the one who is also a master of complex systems. This is the simple reason why MMA doesn't work without countermeasures. Having resolved the issue with the athletes, the young man said that, unfortunately, from childhood, his parents taught him not to give money to anyone, not even his friends. Classmates who watched everything were surprised how it was possible to kill 2 people in just a couple of moments. Gossi is truly incredibly powerful. Looking at the guys lying on the ground, the young man noted that they were talking about the fact that real athletes and our hero himself are the same, since he studied complex systems with all his might and with great interest. After a while, the guys sat with their elbows on the wall and slowly came to their senses. Mori asked who he was. It is clear from his actions that the young man is far from a beginner. Oku replied that he could both throw and hit. Most likely he is dealing with some kind of complex systems. In addition, he has simply unrealistic abilities, just like Takashima. It seems that he is now making money from matches in an underground fight club and is going to make his debut as a professional next month. Suddenly, Kisaragi appeared and asked if they were talking about underground matches, otherwise he had trouble hearing. Mori asked him who he was. The young man replied that he was in charge of all these underground battles and introduced himself. The guys had obviously heard a lot about him, so they were surprised that he was standing in front of them in person. The young man smiled insidiously and said that he had one request for them. The guys, confused, asked what he wanted to hear or receive from them. Kisaragi replied that they had just fought Gossi and they didn't want to be the losers anyway. Then he asked if they wanted a rematch and try to finish him off. Meanwhile, in one of the gyms, the pro was doing his regular training. Suddenly, a young man appeared and handed him a towel. After listening to him, the athlete replied that everything was clear to him, but he was going to make his debut next month and with what joy he should take part in scoring in the city. Oku objected that, after all, he loves it most, but the pro replied that it's all in the past and he doesn't even go underground after one match. The young man began to beg him and say that recently a very strong young man had appeared. His name is Gossi, from the Tehran school, and he is gaining popularity too quickly. Takashima replied that he had not fought for nothing for a very long time, but he could do it for 300,000 yen. The guys were taken aback when they heard the amount the athlete named. The pro replied that they had to earn money while hunting the bullies. He won't just walk on thin ice. If professionals find out about him, he will be in trouble. After thinking a little, the guys agreed and reported that they had started tracking all of Gossi's movements. The young man, hearing this, laughed and asked why they were doing unnecessary things. This guy will be participating in the next match in the underground fight club. Takashima said that Kisaragi suddenly called him and in honor of him leaving, the prize will be 1 million yen and the same Gossi will participate in his first fight. Then he asked if it was possible to beat him so that he would never recover. Oku cautiously said that if the pros were going to participate anyway, then what was the point of paying them for it? Takashima objected that he would still have to pay. He said that he would beat this guy the way they wanted or they had something against it. The guys were afraid to argue with him, so, after thinking a little, they agreed. The athlete said that apparently this Gossi somehow sank into Kisaragi's soul. Oku asked what he meant. The pro replied that during the last match, he said that he was going to leave. The boss said that he would give 1 million yen to finally destroy this guy. If he is neutralized, he will not be able to vote, if only for the reason that he will simply not be able to. Another strange thing is that this tournament will be held without any bets. They simply won't get paid for it. Oku was surprised that the organizer would not have any profit and would simply go broke, paying 1 million from his own pocket. After which, he added that in fact they were also sent to him by Kisaragi. He said that in order to destroy Gossi, his family must first be fought. Perhaps, he also said similar things. Takashima thought that this all looked extremely suspicious, but to the boss it seemed like this guy was a VIP. The next day, our hero was training at Miharu's house. He pulled dumbbells and squatted with them. Saracina came into the room and said that he trained the same way yesterday. You need to give one muscle group rest for at least 2 days. This is all unlike him, because the young man knows no less about muscle gain than the jocks, and perhaps even more. The guy, with sarcasm in his voice, replied that Saracena said everything correctly and he agreed with him. And he thought that he seemed to be in too much of a hurry. Recently there was a conversation about a professional fighter and then, perhaps, he will have to fight with Yatsuki. If during the fight he becomes ill, then this will not help him in any way and will not save the situation. After all his thoughts, our hero turned to Saracena and said that whatever it was, thanks for the warning. Miharu pointed to the protein cupcake and said that it was made with his own hands, so let the young man help himself. Then he added that, of course, I wouldn't want to brag, but it turned out very tasty. The young man was touched to himself at how economical this old man was. Miharu asked why he was looking at him like he wanted to say something. The young man replied that from the outside he would never have said that he liked cooking so much. Saracena was embarrassed and said that one of his dreams is to open a bakery in the near future. The guy thought to himself that this role was absolutely unsuitable for a thug like him. Then, he imagined a picture of his friend opening a protein sweet store and calling it Crazy Bull, where he kneads the dough and cooks everything himself. Besides, this would never make him more popular, but he answered out loud that dreaming is very good and useful. Miharu replied that, yes, he also wants to open it with such a beauty and a wonderful girl as Chisato. Our hero, out of surprise, thought to himself that he would not allow this. But then, he smiled slightly and said that, no matter how it was, he was grateful that he had such a good friend next to him, who would always stop him in time when he was bored and mentally relaxed with various jokes. Saracena replied that he was quite serious about what other jokes he made about the bakery and Chisato. Gossi asked to stop trying to marry his younger sister. To himself, the guy thought that someone who has a martial arts system must have had hard and intense training, which is one of the key points in becoming a professional. With a skinny body like his, fighting against a pro is fraught with danger and it seems like he won't be able to pull off this fight and won't last even one round. But, he is obliged to protect his little sister, so he must build up his muscles and regain his strength as soon as possible and by any means necessary. Meanwhile, someone beat up Mori in Oku. Takashima responded to this by saying that he didn't think there would be anyone who would want to fight with him. The young man replied that he was not a professional yet. He can become one only if he enters the top 4 among amateurs in competitions. There should be no agreement with the group. If he participates, the result will decide everything. Takashima said that the stranger understands everything correctly, but for some reason he still starts a showdown. The guy replied that if he became a pro, he would not be able to participate in scoring, so there was no more chance. The stranger turned out to be Murayama, who said that if the athlete is ready, then let him attack, because his 2 allies are already lying on the ground and everything can be blamed on self-defense. Takashima asked why it had to be him. Ichiro replied that he always wanted to try to fight a martial artist. In a juvenile detention center, a little girl weighing less than 70 kilograms beat him half to death. The pro was surprised how it was possible to defeat a boxing master with such a physique. Therefore, Murayama wants to fight Takashima. Their height is approximately the same, but the athlete has twice as much muscle. Basically, they are about the same size. Then he added that he forgot to say that recently he also began to be interested in martial arts. In order to take revenge on that kid, and Takashima will simply be a punching bag for his training. After listening to all this, the professional laughed loudly and said that he was not normal, because he decided to make a punching bag out of a person who was stronger than the young man who beat him at one time. Ichiro replied that right now they will decide whether Gossi is stronger or not. Hearing a familiar name, the professional became interested, and he decided to give his consent. Having said that you can already start having fun, Ichiro rushed to attack the master of sports. They deftly dodged each other's attacks, and the guy thought that so far everything was happening exactly the same as with Gossi. When Murayama wanted to hit him in the face, the pro, just like the kid, used a technique, evasion. Then, Takashima suddenly ran at him and knocked him down. He fell to the ground from his own height. Having saddled him, the pro stated that his opponent had been knocked down, and if he wanted to give up, then let him say so now. Murayama thought to himself that again everything happened exactly the same as with Gossi, but he is no longer the same person he was before. That time when he was knocked down, he could not get out of the trap that had formed. In order to improve and not make past mistakes, he trained hard in the dojo. When Ichiro brought his fist to Takashima's jaw, he asked if he was really doing complex training, because it was impossible to transfer weight into a punch from below. And he doesn't use his back. One punch will not produce any power. Murayama replied that his reasoning was correct. After which, he silently raised his thumb to the professional's eyeball. Jumping up, Takashima stated that he wanted to gouge out his eye. What is he even trying to achieve? He just wanted to take part in something in between scoring and complex systems or something. Ichiro replied that everything was correct. He began studying complex techniques to learn how to get out, starting with pinning techniques. As the pro has already heard, the young man is engaged in boxing, so when he stands in fights, he cannot lose. The athlete shouted that in this case he would now wipe the confident smile from his face. After which, he made a powerful blow directly to Murayama's genitals. Then, he sharply gouged out his eye and Ichiro lost his sight forever. Takashima stated that he, with his 7 and 10 kilograms, was able to defeat a more than 100 kilogram heavyweight boxer in just 3 steps. After which, with confidence and narcissism, he said that he was still a genius. Ichiro thought to himself that to master the Gossi eye poke, based on a modern Japanese art that has its origins in Shaolin Kung Fu, no special training is needed. You just need to aim for the face and attack like a machine gun, but Takashima's eye poke is clearly different. The young man was aiming not at a plane, but at a point that was very difficult to hit. A professional uses techniques not only from complex systems. Is he really even more skilled in fighting without rules than that nimble little Gossi? Murayama turned to the athlete and asked him to tell him how he managed to hit one single, weak spot. The young man replied that he was not only a fighter of complex martial arts, but also a master of street fighting. Then he said that Ichiro said that Gossi has techniques from complex techniques. He is going to fight him underground. And as he knows, in this fight club, you cannot follow the rules and hit him in the eye and genitals, so the ring will be his. Even if someone there knows the complexes better than him, he will still lose. These fighters train seriously, but they are simply masters of competitive, integrated martial arts. They do not have the skills of killers and experience in street fights, so it is obvious who will win. The arena competition is still ahead, and it will be very interesting. After that, the young man took his mobile phone and sent someone a message. The answer came very quickly and the pro said that he had to go, he was going to visit the girl. The guys asked how he could go and indulge in carnal pleasures after such a harsh execution. Takashima replied that this and violence, for him, come one after the other. They are connected to each other. But he added that stealing and committing violence against his opponent's younger sister is too much. Oku replied that Kisaragi said that in order to get Gossi, it would be necessary to resort to even that. The pro stated that it seemed like the boss really liked this guy too much. Then he asked what his sister looked like and if she was cute. After which, he added that he would pay them 50,000 yen out of the 300,000 that he was owed if they filmed him bullying Chisato. Oku cautiously asked why he decided to pay them for this as well. Takashima explained that a Yakuza acquaintance told him that he could make good money from uncensored pornographic materials. The guy concluded that a pro knows how to look for his profit everywhere. He replied that he plans to live on money from the business. On the day of the fight, the young man came to an underground fight club, where a crowd of guys greeted him and bowed. One of them shouted for our hero to try hard today. Gossi looked at him and could not understand who it was, but then it dawned on him that it was the one who spread the word to everyone that the young man was going to participate in the battle. Also, the leader of the Crazy Bulls, Onikami Zaiudzi, who was also known as the God of Darkness, came to cheer for the young man. The young man greeted him and asked in confusion how he ended up here and why. Onikami replied that his advisor would be taking part today and of course he wanted to see it. Then he added that if he makes himself a disgrace, he won't get away with it so easily. Our hero laughed nervously. Zaiudzi said that he was only partially joking, the guy had to show his best side. Looking around, the young man saw that the gang leaders from Chiba had arrived. The God of Darkness said that as soon as one of them is touched, they must fight back. These guys just underestimate Gossi. It's all about the prestige of Crazy Bulls. Even if the young man does not have enough strength to win, then let him at least show diligence. After which, he laughed and said that he was almost sure that our hero would not lose. Then, Gossi saw that Takashima Sunya had arrived, whom everyone considered to be a win-win emperor and a master of his craft, who would become a professional starting next month. Everyone around was discussing why he had come. Someone thought that he would be a spectator, but another replied that he was registered as a participant. The guy thought to himself that according to history, he should not be a participant today. This way, the two Chiba heads won't fight each other. Really, events have changed again, and the young man has not looked at that same notebook with notes on the investigation of the Tokyo incident for so long. Smiling, the pro asked if he was the VIP named Gossi. The young man asked what this meant. Takashima replied that he didn't know that Kisaragi had his eye on him for a very long time. In order to tease the guy, the boss persuaded him, who was already planning to give up underground fights, to take part in them one last time. The young man began to form a puzzle in his head, and he realized that Kisaragi clearly knew something. But, be that as it may, first you need to deal with Sunya. He is the new leader of the group and 10 years younger than him. The young man studied his style until he lost his pulse. All his techniques and habits were in his head, but he was not aware of his abilities. The young man has no physical advantage, but in the information fight, he has no equal. Perhaps something will come of this. Then, Takashima got ready to leave and finally said that Gossi would have the first round with him. Then he muttered under his breath that it seems that the opponent is fond of complex ones, but he does not want to use only them and will demonstrate all the strength of the street fighting master, as well as what he is capable of. Meanwhile, Chisato stood on the street and waited for someone who was clearly delayed. Unexpectedly, Saracina appeared, who was very apologetic for his lateness and said that it was because the train was late. The girl thought to herself that she was not at all surprised by his strange appearance, because he was a friend of her older brother. Miharu looked extremely provocative and unusual, so everyone around them did not take their eyes off them. Chisato cautiously asked why he was wearing a suit. The guy replied that it was all just like that, especially since they were going to go shopping. Therefore, he decided to wear it just to be sure. The girl laughed and said that it was not necessary to do this. The young man was afraid that she didn't like it and began to worry that he looked too formal. Then, he rattled for her to wait just a minute. He quickly ran to the store and bought himself other clothes. The girl was confused by surprise and could not understand where he rushed and why. After some time, he reappeared and apologized for keeping him waiting. He was wearing a terrible red leopard shirt. Chisato laughed nervously again. The young man was worried that this time he dressed too roughly. Then, he again asked to wait a little. This time he would choose a much better image, and it would be perfect. After which, he began to quickly run somewhere and say that he didn't want her to be ashamed of him. The girl noticed that everyone around was already staring at them and thought that her older brother's friends were so strange. Chisato was already waiting for Saracina and got bored. Meanwhile, two young men were watching her. It was Oki and Mori, who were talking about the fact that it looked like the young man would be gone for a long time, and perhaps would not return at all. Then the boxer said that he would go and steal it now, and let his friend cover him at this time. The judoka noted that she is really cute and looks much better than in the photo. Oku replied that he also thought so and that she needed to be dragged into the mountains for 2 days in order to film a bunch of videos. Mori said that he had been holding back for so long. The boxer replied that he too and smiled disgustingly. They were just about to leave when someone approached them from behind and put a hand on their shoulder. It was Iki Yatsuki, the strongest man in the world, according to all the high school students. The young man asked what they meant by stealing his close friend's sister and dragging her into the mountains. After looking at each other, the guys asked each other what this little guy wanted from them. Apparently he doesn't understand at all who he decided to contact and blurted out something threatening. Oku said that he is aware that in fighting and martial arts, the difference in weight is equal to the difference in strength. Mori stopped him and said that there was no point in explaining anything to thick-headed hooligans. They cannot understand anything about the difference in height, because they are narrow-minded. Then the boxer added that if the boy thinks that they are afraid when such small fry as he snarls, then he is deeply mistaken. In fact, they are just very annoying, and if a guy doesn't want to get involved, it doesn't mean he's afraid. He just doesn't see a worthy opponent in the young man. Then he added that an athlete who marks in today will be many times stronger. Today is the hardest to get into and most prestigious university in Japan, where top athletes can get into without taking exams. Iki got tired of listening to insults from this guy, and he punched him in the face as hard as he could. The attack was so powerful that the boxer flew some distance, doing a somersault in the air and fell to the ground. After which, he asked Mori, who was shocked by what he saw, what they told him about the difference in weight. The judoka shouted that it couldn't be that with one blow a person would simply fly away. This is unrealistic. Unexpectedly, Murayama appeared, who said that if they were talking about the difference in weight, then he had a difference of several tens. Mori was taken aback by Ichiro's appearance and asked where he came from and how he found them. The guy replied that he couldn't help but interfere anywhere after he was beaten. After that day, his targets for revenge were Gasi, Takashima and the two of them. Therefore, he tracks all their movements and always knows where they are. And now, they were found by the strongest among all the people in the world, according to high school students, Iki Yatsuki. Mori had heard about this young man many times, but could not imagine that he looked like this. And in general, I thought that stories about such a legend were just rumors, but I was already convinced that he really exists. Ichiro said that they got themselves into a lot of trouble while they were hunting down the bullies. The team that suffered the most was the Yatsuki Saints. Mori wondered that they recently attacked one very strong young man and they even had to act together. Was he really from the Iki group? Murayama continued that Yatsuki became a legend not only because he is so strong. The young man also thinks a lot about his comrades and is always ready to stand up for them. If someone asks him for help, he will instantly contact all his many acquaintances and all the hooligans will begin to look for the necessary person. Iki is the most charismatic of all the hooligans and everyone present here is just a small part of those who have the guys at gunpoint. Then he added that he has one friend who doesn't like guys and likes violence. This young man is a very bad person. Also, among all those gathered there are people with rights, so Mori and Oku can go on tour with them right now. After which, the judoist was suddenly grabbed and began to be dragged towards the minibus that was parked near them. Mori screamed and tried to escape. The girl, hearing some loud screams, thought that somehow it had become too noisy. Then, I saw Miharu, who was standing talking to someone. He finally dressed properly and Chisato thought that this outfit suits him. When Saracina turned around, Gossi's sister saw that he was carrying a heavy package from some grandmother. Apparently he just decided to help her. The old woman was very grateful to the young man, so she waved goodbye with a smile. Approaching Chisato, the young man once again apologized for being so late and she had to wait for a long time. The girl said that she thought that all her older brother's friends were complete hooligans, but it seems that this is not at all the case. Some time later, Murayama was running somewhere as fast as he could and was clearly late for something important. Having run underground, he stated that it seemed that nothing had started yet and he had not missed anything. The cashier asked why Ichiro was in such a hurry. The young man replied that he just got involved in the showdown, so he thought he wouldn't make it in time. The guy thought that Murayama wanted to participate and said that, unfortunately, applications and registration ended yesterday. Today is a big match, so you can't sign up unorganized like before. Although, Ichiro is quite popular. The excitement and interest of the audience could be very hot. But the young man interrupted him and said that he was not going to take part today. The young man came just to look. There is no way he should miss the first round. The cashier clarified whether he was referring to the fight between the unbeaten emperor and Gossi. Murayama replied yes. The young man exclaimed that the guy wanted to watch the beating. What a bad character Kisaragi has. I didn't expect him to compete in a competition where the weak would be bullied. But the cashier didn't think that Ichiro would be so interested in a public beating. If he had been involved, the fight wouldn't have seemed so one-sided because Murayama is a worthy opponent. The guy replied no. He already fought with this Takazima and lost to him, losing his eye. In addition, he fought with Gossi, and he also beat him unconscious. So Murayama just has to watch tonight's fight between the two. The cashier was taken aback that such a big guy lost to the skinny Gossi. Meanwhile, our hero was already standing in the ring opposite the professional, and he was preparing for the match. The spectators sat and discussed that the pro was engaged in complex training, and the young man contrasted strongly with him. Our hero thought to himself that this guy was quite famous. He was on the same level with him and the same master of complex martial arts. But, unfortunately, he had to resign due to an injury. There were rumors that he was in a group controlled by Kisaragi, but be that as it may, his abilities are second to none. In addition, at the moment, he already has developed muscles and weight, so the young man cannot compare with him. But now the guy's physical form is at least better than it was initially, after returning to this time branch. Moreover, all the matches in which the professional fought were already in his head, so he knows how to win, and his opponent does not know what he is capable of, literally at all. If you look from the point of view of information warfare, then our hero is definitely stronger. If he now had the body he had before, victory would be his in just a couple of minutes. But the question remained open whether the young man would be able to move as professionally. In the meantime, the judge said that the use of weapons is prohibited, but everything else can be used. There are no restrictions. Takashima said that, apparently, the young man also does complex training and knows its techniques. The guy replied that he had previously been very interested in them, but at the moment he had become a master of street fighting. The athlete smiled insidiously and said that he had exactly the same abilities. Gossi thought to himself that he had not felt this way for a long time, it was as if time had stopped. There is a feeling that before the fight, his concentration is at its maximum limit. The young man doesn't even hear the voices of the spectators screaming around his favorite ring. This fight is a battle of the strongest with the strongest. Finally, a beep sounded, indicating that it was time to start, and the guys lightly bumped their fists. Without wasting a second, Takashima immediately decided to launch a surprise attack from behind in order to take our hero by surprise. Or the professional does not perceive him as an opponent at all. The young man felt blood running down his face and could not understand where it came from, because he managed to dodge. The pro said that it was written on the guy's face that he was able to avoid a direct hit, but he still didn't understand anything. Takashima said that he is not a master of complex techniques, he is a master of street fighting. Kisaragi, who watched the fight, said that Gossi was clearly confused and panicked due to the sudden onset of bleeding. Then he turned to Kagurazaki and asked how he, as a weapons master, liked this outcome. A sadist would obviously suggest that they take knives and try to dismember each other. Kagurazaki replied that he shouldn't talk nonsense. When a young man takes a knife, he chooses a time and place. And, if with the conditions of an underground match, then weapons would not be the best option. Kisaragi said that the answer was quite thoughtful and he himself would not want his ward to get hurt too much. The sadist said that he wanted to return a long time for the fact that the fallen man was picked up and put on his feet. If the boss orders, the young man will get the insides to anyone who needs them. Our hero stood and thought that he dodged, while his opponent managed to hit the target. The thoughts were interrupted by the judge, who ran and shouted that everything needed to be stopped as the young man was bleeding heavily. The young man was perplexed that injuries were being checked at an underground match. Meanwhile, the man muttered that the eyeball was not hit. The young man thought to himself that what other apple, the cut couldn't be that deep. After which, I noticed how, on the other side of the ring, Takashima was passing a small blade from his hands to an acquaintance. The young man did not expect such treachery and asked the judge if he was also bribed like everyone else. The man replied that anything could happen. Gossi said that it is strange that bleeding is checked at an underground match. That he can understand just by looking. The judge replied that everything was correct. They didn't tell him to go and examine him, but they also didn't tell him that he couldn't. The young man realized that everything was carefully planned against him and he was already in the hands of his opponent. Then there is only darkness. Our hero shouted that that's it, just examine him and the path will finally move away from him. Looking at Gossi's gaze, Takashima asked if he guessed what just happened. The young man answered yes. The pro asked why he wasn't angry, since he had just been cut and tried to deceive. Our hero replied that there was no point in protesting, because no one would listen to him anyway. It would look very stupid from the outside. The pro didn't waste any time and delivered his next kick to the torso. After which, he tried to strike the next blow to the face. Gossi noted that the guy would attack without him even noticing. The young man thought that if an opponent who is worse at pinning technique than him hits, then the sequence of his actions is predictable. After dealing damage, a capture will follow. Then, he will climb on top of the enemy and that, in fact, is all, the final part. Takashima stated that, having done some compound training, it is too early to try to compete with him. But, suddenly, our hero grabbed him by the ear. This is a forbidden technique in complex martial arts. In a person, a reflex is triggered when his ear is pulled. Whichever direction they drag him, that's where he bends. When engaging in free-for-all, this is the most common way to avoid capture. The professional did a somersault back some distance from Gossi. The young man defiantly told him to get up and continue the fight. Takashima noted that the young man is really not a master of complex techniques, but a master of street fighting. No more pinning by sticking your fingers in your eyes and tearing your ears off. There is no risk. But, due to the bleeding, our hero had a limited field of vision, so you can simply beat him. After which, he delivered a powerful kick to Gossi's kneecap. All that remains is to finish him off using your usual techniques. It would be enough. The young man noted that his sequence switched to strikes. Now everything is going as he planned. Takashima landed a hard blow to the head, which Gossi did not have time to dodge. Seeing that the guy began to lose his balance, the pro came to the conclusion that his blow was just right. All that remains is to deliver the decisive blow that will turn off the opponent's consciousness and lead him to victory. Our hero thought to himself that this was his trick leading to a knockout. He hits the back of the head with a high kick after rendering his opponent unable to fight back. This technique is actually 90% effective as a knockout. Our hero successfully dodged this attack. Understanding all this, Takashima thought that the young man was stupid and did not know everything about it. But the young man calculated everything from the very beginning and knew all his further actions. The young man is not stupid enough to allow a blow to be thrown that will cause a concussion. After which, he punched his opponent in the jaw. After which, I roundhouse kicked him in the face as hard as I could. Takashima was already almost passed out and began to fall to the ground. All that remained was to deliver the final decisive blow. Of course, this is an attack to the throat. In complex martial arts, this technique is considered prohibited due to its danger. Having already brought his fist to the desired point, Gossi stopped and said that he could be killed in this way now. After which, he turned and asked the judge if he should continue. He replied that no, the young man won, because if they have a corpse here underground, then this will cease to be entertainment. The young man replied that it seemed the judge was also his enemy, so let him start next. The man flatly refused and replied that he did not want to. Then Gossi ordered him to end the matches and declare the winner. After these words, he immediately shouted that the winner of the first round was our hero. Next, Inbari Yudzi from the Kings of the Night, lost to a hooligan who is engaged in wrestling. Fuva Seigo from Dora, defeated the street fighting master from Shibuya. After which, he fought in the final duel with the young man. The fight ended instantly after being knocked to the ground and a choke hold. The leaders of the Crazy Bulls approached our hero to congratulate him on his victory. The God of Darkness had a hard time finding the words to say that the guy had exceeded all his expectations. Those around him immediately whispered that the winner had something to do with the Crazy Bulls, since he stood talking to them calmly. One of them picked up that he heard that they were their new fighting advisor, and it was incredible who the Bulls managed to grab for themselves. The cashier was still standing in bewilderment that he treated Fuva Seigo from Dora like a small child, and in general, he was able to defeat an invincible pro. Now it also turns out that he belongs to the highest ranks of the Crazy Bulls, but what kind of position is this, a fighting advisor? In general, there are many outstanding personalities there, and what distinguishes them is that they are very friendly with each other. In addition, Murayama somehow looks too contentedly in their direction, as if he completely agrees with the results. Who is this Gossi really? At that time, our hero thought that he had managed to prevent the formation of an alliance consisting of two factions originally from Chiba. But I didn't even have the slightest idea what would come to Kisaragi's head next and what he would do. After the fight, the young man walked a little with the heads of the Crazy Bulls and talked with them. Thus, the guy prevented the formation of a group from Chiba. The incident will now also not happen, and Miharu will not die. Kisaragi will not unite with Yatsuki and form a group, two crescents. Everything went according to his plan. Plus, the main prize was 1 million yen. This is a huge amount of money. Now you can buy as much protein as you like and buy all the necessary equipment for training. Also, he can afford to buy a cool motorcycle, and apparently he won't get the promised old Onikami bike for free now. Suddenly, Murayama's voice interrupted his thoughts, calling him a champion and saying that the fight was great. And he asked how things were going with him and if he could treat him to something. As a result, they went to some kind of eatery, where they ate self-cooked meat, and his friend also drank beer. The young man sat in bewilderment and did not understand why he was even sitting here with Ichiro. The big man smiled and said that everything in this place is very tasty. After already drinking 3 glasses, Murayama raised his hand and asked the waitress to bring him another beer. Gossi was perplexed, because he was still a minor, and according to the law, alcohol cannot be consumed by persons under 20 years of age. Ichiro continued to order and said he wanted beef ribs for 5, beef tongue for 5, and the best roast for 5. Our hero thought to himself that it was impossible to be more modest and at least not ask for all the best. After all, he was the one paying. Then, he asked what he needed from him. Not that he wouldn't be interested in organizing a casual reunion of graduates from an adult detention center, but still. Murayama replied that he had already explained everything and would not return until he fulfilled his promise to the young man. The young man sighed and asked on what basis he should accept his revenge. Ichiro shouted menacingly that he couldn't let him stay with the victory. Gossi smiled that he was acting like an underclassman. After which, he exclaimed that he had said more than once that he did not like to take part in meaningless fights. If he wants it so badly, then why not just attack him in broad daylight and unexpectedly? Indeed, in this case, the young man will have to fight with him, even if he does not want it. Unexpectedly, Murayama replied that doing so was wrong and impossible. In order to defeat him, the guy took up boxing training again for the first time in a long time. And it would be wrong to simply not demonstrate all your efforts. Gossi asked if he wanted to compete some more and not just start a fight that no one wanted. Then he added whether he even wanted to take boxing seriously. Ichiro did not expect such a question and said that after the fight with him, he realized that the young man was strong not because of his physical capabilities. And not only because of innate talent. If you don't train until you spit blood, no one can hit like him. Memories of that fight came flooding back to our hero, and he replied that he well remembered the ringing in his ears from Murayama's blow. Still, the guy has a past when he was diligently and professionally involved in boxing. Ichiro explained that, unfortunately, after one incident, people associated with boxing no longer want to deal with him. As soon as he found out that he was being sent to a juvenile detention center, the people who considered him a boxing genius suddenly all disappeared somewhere. The young man now understood the real reason and muttered that he still had zeal and talent. If he was able to train this much, it means he really likes boxing. Murayama fell silent, and the young man asked what was wrong with him. Ichiro replied that he was very sorry that this happened and this was the first time such words had been said to him, so he was embarrassed. The coaches treated him with disrespect and considered him some kind of trash. No one ever praised him for such diligence and effort. So he was embarrassed when he heard that he had talent. All the other hooligans think that he is boxing only for the sake of taking part in street fights and using his techniques there. But, Gossi is the first to notice that I really love this type of martial art. The young man replied that his blows were, of course, destructive. Then he exclaimed, "Why don't he try to become a professional?" Suddenly, Murayama fell silent and thought about something. Then he put the unfinished glass of beer on the table. Then, he shouted to the waitress that he was refusing the beer he had recently ordered and that they would rather bring 3 oolong teas instead. Our hero received some message on his mobile phone and, apologizing to Ichiro, said that there was no need to order anything else as he urgently needed to escape. Having paid the bill, the young man told him to eat and drink everything he ordered, but the only thing was not to drink beer. Murayama stopped him and, returning the check, said that he would pay for himself. The young man asked why he suddenly decided so. Ichiro replied that he did not want to remain indebted to him. Then, when he saw the figure of almost 60,000 yen on the check, he was shocked. After which, he said in confusion that he was missing quite a bit. Gossi asked how much money he has at the moment. The goon replied 1,500 yen. Our hero was at a loss as to how he wanted to pay for himself. After which, an old acquaintance asked me to give him a phone number to contact. Let the young man pay for it today, and Murayama, a little later, will definitely return all the money to him. Our hero thought to himself that in the end he was paying for everything anyway, and what was the point of this useless conversation? Meanwhile, in the presence of Takashima and Kaguradzaki, Kisaragi decided to break some news. In front of them stood the leader of the group of hooligans of northern Chiba Dora, whose name is Fuva Seigo, and the leader of the group of hooligans of southern Chiba, the Night Kings, whose name is Inbari Rudzi. Kisaragi informed them that from now on they would become one team under his leadership and it would be called the Chiba Group. He plans to expand his business soon, and a conflict of interest continues to grow between all the Kanto gangs. Also, as the boss said earlier, he needs a large number of drug distributors. He needs a gang that can move mountains, something like Universal Soldiers. These two guys will perfectly fill the missing link. If the main figures of Chiba unite and invite everyone to follow them, then they will have practically no equal, and no one will be able to resist them. Fuva replied that Kisaragi was offering them terrible things, but what would they gain if he took them under his wing? The boss replied that he would reward them generously. They will receive much more than what their parents give them and the scholarship gives them. Seigo replied that this was all clear. He knows that Kisaragi has been targeting all the shady businesses in Tokyo for a very long time. He simply needs obedient soldiers who will do all the dirtiest things. Then why can't he turn to all the groups in Tokyo itself, and why is he interested in the gangs from Chiba? The boss thought to himself that this was all because his main goal at the moment was the death of Saracina, but he couldn't tell them about it. Therefore, he began to say that the balance of power in Tokyo is much more complicated than it seems to them from the outside. Its different regions have divided spheres of influence among themselves and are now tied to each other hand and foot. If Kisaragi starts a big business there, then his current army of subordinates will collapse in the blink of an eye. Inbari got angry and called the boss an obscene word and said that he really thinks that Chiba is a fruitful place for him, where no one can put a spoke in his wheels. That is, it turns out that he does not respect the Gopniks from this city. Then he said that depending on his answer, he would decide what to do with him next. But then he exclaimed that it was too late and he was very angry, so what would they do next? Kisaragi, after listening to him, thought that he was very annoying and behaved like a caveman. Then, Rudzi looked at Kaguradzaki and asked what he was doing here. Did the boss really take him in out of pity? According to rumors, he once already recruited a gang of 100 people, and as a result, they were driven into a corner and turned into a bloody mess. How can Kisaragi count on this person after this? The sadist got angry and started calling him names, but the boss quickly shut his mouth. Kaguradzaki wanted to say something in response, but one look from Kisaragi was enough to understand that he needed to shut up. Inbari said that behind the boss is an undefeated fighter who lost miserably and lost his name in one of the last rounds. And following him, humiliated Kaguradzaki. Did he really think that they would be afraid at the sight of them? Kisaragi asked to think carefully and carefully weigh all the pros and cons. In order to successfully expand throughout Tokyo, they need a large number of good fighters. To begin with, his group is going to strengthen itself in the suburbs of Tokyo and remote areas. He guarantees that by joining him, the guys will not lose their authority, and his gang will receive the required number of people. What do they see as bad in this proposal, and what exactly does not suit them so much? Fuva replied that the problem is that Kisaragi is a businessman, as they understood, and the guys themselves are ordinary thugs. Rudzi added that if he wants to make the hooligans obey, then he should not show or offer them pieces of paper. And he must demonstrate what he is like in a fight or at least show his willpower. Kisaragi thought to himself that in society, a person who shifts pieces of paper can also be the president. The primitive thinking of these narrow-minded people gave him a headache. It was very troublesome to work with them, and they would definitely listen to the most powerful man in the world. Kisaragi got tired of babysitting them and he took out a pistol from his jacket pocket, which he pointed at the heads of the groups. Then he stated that they should be aware that he has enormous connections. Inbari got even angrier and said that by taking out a cannon against the unarmed, he imagined himself to be the strongest or something. They will never accept someone like him as their leader in their life. Kisaragi said that they told him that he had to either prove himself in a fight or demonstrate willpower. After which, he silently began to shake out 4 out of 6 cartridges from the pistol. Then, putting the barrel to his temple, he said that he was choosing the latter and that was his willpower. Rudzi was taken aback by the fact that he was about to play Russian roulette. Kisaragi reported that there were 2 bullets in the drum. Chances of being shot are 2 in 6. All 3 must participate. The one who does not dare to pull the trigger loses. The guys looked at him with their mouths open and decided that he was definitely bluffing. But Kisaragi did not chicken out and actually pulled the trigger, causing the group leaders to fall into an even greater stupor. Handing out a pistol, the boss said that, after all, they were bikers, from whom fighting spirit was pouring out. This means that for them it should be a piece of cake than for some businessman like him. After which, he turned to Fuva and said that now it was his turn to play, but the young man did not answer. Kisaragi stated that since he refused, he would personally go through this test again and put the gun to his head. After firing another shot, the boss asked why they stood rooted to the spot with their mouths open. Then he added that due to the color of their faces, it could be assumed that they had indigestion. After which, he said that he would try his luck again, try to do without victims and steal their chance to try their luck. Then he fired another shot again. After that, he said that now the chance of getting a bullet in the head has become 2 to 2 and he somehow doesn't want to help them anymore. Then, he handed them a pistol and asked again which of the group leaders would be next in line. Rudzi shouted at them to confess and tell the truth, because this was obviously some kind of dummy. After which, calling him obscene words, he told him not to joke with them like that and took this pistol and fired a shot straight at Kisaragi. But, unexpectedly, he was covered with his body by Kagurazaki, who was now wounded in the shoulder. The young man was in shock as he did not think that he would actually shoot and that he could just kill a man. Kisaragi grinned and said that they were really so upset that they never managed to pull the trigger. But they are so famous for their spirit and courage, it would be very unfortunate and ugly if someone found out about today's history. What should they all do now? Rudzi replied that now, they recognize his willpower. A businessman deserves to bow his head before him. The boss replied that since he is worthy and they recognize him, then why do they still call him Kisaragi? Apparently, everything was very bad with the Japanese language at their school. The guys should ask Mr. Kisaragi to take them under his wing. If you have watched up to this point, then I am very grateful to you, because this is where the video ends. If it's not difficult for you, then like this video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to continue this story, then write in the comments. Thank you all, I love you all.